36. Chapter 36, Adopting Strays. Narcissa Black sipped red wine that was so dark that Sirius tapped his animagus grim senses to confirm did not contain actual blood. They had both been raised black, so Muggle Merlot was a thing. They eyed each other across the table, while Draco was being bullied into letting Luna Lovegood feed him Chinese food with chopsticks. I don't see why I have to eat this Muggle food. I mean, I'm all about culture, of course, as a pure blood, but culture came with forks. Draco insisted as a piece of pork dripping in something that looked like troll blood. The nearly jelly-like red did smell both sweet and savory, so while his mouth objected, his tongue and salivary glands were in full rebellion. You are a dragon. This is food of the court of the Dragon Emperor. You should eat it. Besides, it can't be Muggle food if you need to master not one but two wands to eat it. Luna mused. She stopped and her eyes shot open. It is duelist food and dragon food. So clearly you can't eat anything else. Luna said as if this explained everything. Narcissa looked at Sirius and then at Luna. The odd child, what is her relationship with my Draco and your heir? Suggested Harry. Kidnappers, suggested Neville. Rescuers, corrected Hermione. Lunatic horde, concluded Millicent. And minions, cheered Fred and George, who had accompanied them into exile while a fuming Percy screamed at them. Come back, you're grounded to the common room. I am head boy. Sirius sipped his own wine and looked at Luna, his eyes hooded, his memories haunting him. Taugers per, Narcissa. Do you remember those words? Narcissa raised her head proudly, her beauty a thing of ice and iron, remote, cold, and utterly uncaring over the judgment of those beneath her. She answered coldly. Always pure, the motto of House Black. I remember it, Sirius. It was not I that broke faith with it. What has that to do with the odd child and my Draco? Sirius looked up now, gesturing at the children, and the snake who was even now insisting that his mouse giver supply him with sweet and sour pork offerings like Draco was being fed by Luna. Taugers per, always pure. Odd words those when you think about it. Ancient words that have been handed down since before we came to these shores. Words we brought down from the north with the Franks when they conquered France and took to England with the Norman conquest. We were taught they were about blood purity, which is ridiculous because that non-essence didn't even become an issue until 1588 when Slytherin's grandsons allied with the Spanish Armada. Odd we always took it to be about blood purity when the words were ours since about c. 405. A bit hard to believe it's about blood purity when we had been living by them for 1200 years before it became a thing. Sirius said. Narcissa looked at Sirius, her eyes hooded this time, her thoughts unreadable. If it is not blood purity, what is it then? Her voice wasn't quite a challenge, but it wasn't just a question either. Pure magic. Not light, not dark. The magic we worked before wands, before Rome, and before Merlin set up his system. Pure magic, using the elements of nature to bend the wild magic to the needs of the people. Magic too strong to fit into a single spell, too potent to contain or channel with any wand or staff. Sirius said, his voice becoming excited, a wild light filling his cold grey eyes until they flashed to match his wide wolf grin. Power, Narcissa. It what freaks Dumbledore out so badly. These kids have been fumbling towards pure magic, the magic that was the root of the families back before there was a sacred 28, and Luna Lovegood sees it. Sirius said, and he was no longer the marauder, the bad boy rebel, the prankster. His voice now was the Lord of House Black, inheritor of an unbroken line of war wizards that stretched back to the Frankish conquest of Roman Gaul. Narcissa's eyes flew wide, and she looked over at Luna, who smiled back at her dreamily, her fingers dancing as she made Draco imitate Noodle and lunge to get his deep-fried prawn. Narcissa extended her own sense and felt the pool of magic swirling around Luna, a chaotic pool of power like the aura of a unicorn rather than a witch or wizard. She is a seer, Narcissa asked in shock. Hermione answered before Sirius could speak. Not at all. Seers are channels that occasionally get overwhelmed by magic when it has a prophecy that is ready to begin moving. They are tubes messages get shoved through. They don't know or understand the message itself. Luna swims in the sea of magic. She sees and feels its currents everywhere all the time. She sees how it moves inside us, around us, and changes because of us. She is probably too wild to ever be a decent wand witch, but magic sings its secrets in her ears, and unfolds wonders before her eyes. Narcissa hissed in shock. Dumbledore is just letting her wander around free. If the unspeakable suspected what she was, they would disappear her into a cell in the Department of Mysteries, never to see the light of day again, being milked of information until she got lonely enough to die. Harry slammed his hand down on the table. No, I have the silver, and we have the power. We will bind her to the coven. Luna says she is our vision, Draco our soul, and Merlin help us all. She swears the ginger idiots are our heart. Narcissa leaned forward and matched Harry glare for glare. Her hand went out to rest on her Draco's shoulder protectively. You think to mark my Draco? You think to put your mark on him when he is promised to the Dark Lord? Narcissa Malfoy challenged. Millicent tapped her butterbeer with her knife to gather everyone's attention. Lady Malfoy, I would think long and hard before I ever allowed anyone I cared about to have the dark mark put on them. I touched it with my wand and simply whispered, and Lord Selwyn did more than die. His body fit into an urn smaller than a cremated cat. I used no spell. I simply activated what was inside it already. A death sentence for any who bore it at the merest whim of its master, or the simple loss of connection to same. It is a slave brand, not an honor. Millicent said, her voice calm and cold, as if delivering a weather report she found only mildly interesting. Neville spoke up next. The runes bind us together in a circle, a coven. We each bring our individual magic to it, and together we can weave the calls of anyone who joins with us in ritual together, so magic itself can hear us. And if our call and desire matches the needs of magic and the world, then miracles happen. He looked at Narcissa calmly, and when Narcissa tried her best cold glare to intimidate the notoriously shy and nervous boy, she felt her eyebrows rise in shock as Neville responded to the challenge with one more response. Oh, and your Dark Lord screams like a bitch when Harry comes for him. I have seen Harry break and eat several pieces of his soul, and every one of them died begging. Neville said, a blush coming to his face as his voice hardened. This time it was Augusta Longbottom who reached out and grabbed her heir's shoulder in support. Draco looked over at his mother and tried to reason with her, rather than the twin options of demanding and begging that had constituted his communication repertoire with his parents for his entire life. Mother, you always said you supported the Dark Lord because those fools at the Ministry, and Dumbledore's light faction wanted to gut the magical power of the pure blood houses, but I have seen his mind. He wanted to gut the magical power of everyone who was not his, and those who were his could only be powerful if they were little more than his mind-broken slaves. All power was his. This is different. Taking the runes of the coven makes us all more powerful individually and more in tune when we are together. It brings us into harmony, but it calls each of us to grow and become great. All my life, Father was raising me to be a copy of him and a good servant to his Dark Lord. Never did anyone think about making Draco Malfoy great. The best I could hope for is to be a pleasing enough tool for my father's house and master. I stood against the darkness, Mother. Me, Draco Malfoy. I fought with my friends because I was Slytherin enough to pick up a tool others dared not, and they were too Hufflepuff to leave me alone facing it. Taking up the runes may or may not make me great, but it will make me Draco Malfoy, wizard and man. When my friends face the Dark Lord again, I will be with them. Draco looked at his mother with his best attempt at a lord's dignity. Sirius burst into an inappropriate belly laugh, not because Draco looked foolish, but because he looked like a 13-year-old copy of Lord Arcturus Black, the ancient black patriarch who died before Draco's birth. Narcissa gave Sirius a glare. That is quite enough, cousin. Turning to Draco, she smiled softly. Tauger's purr, my dragon, always pure. You seek to bind yourself to pure magic, and bind yourself to a company that dares to pit their will against the Dark Lord and Champion of Light, against the Ministry and against the world. Let it not be said, I would deprive my son of his chance at greatness. You wish to join this coven, so mote it be. Luna shattered the solemnity by leaning forward and hugging Draco powerfully, causing him to squawk in indignation and blush scarlet as she cheered. Yay! Fred and George jumped up and pinned Millicent in a joint hug. Minions forever. They cheered together. And tattoos, said George. Mom will agreed Fred go nutters. They cheered together. Narcissa walked her black dog to the flue of the leaky cauldron and fled to Longbottom Manor, where the coven gathered again. The whole of the coven gathered to sing and chant as Alistair Moody drummed, and Hermione's needle wove silver into 4 figures bound in vines summoned by Neville from the earth. Goblin magic bound goblin silver to runes that called to that of the witch, and wizards bound by branch and thorn, by blood and will, to the working. Athala for family, alges for protection were woven into left and right breast of each. This was the binding to the circle. Then the runes of their nature were woven into them. Fred found the X rune known as Jibo over his heart. Jibo was the gift rune, the rune of commitment, of partnership, the rune of harmony. His was the blending of their spirits and natures. George felt the rune of Wunjo weave above his heart. Like an arrow pointing upward with only one side, it was the rune of joy, of completion, of fulfillment. Wunjo was the joy of their will manifest in the world through their magic. Together, the twins were the heart of the coven, and they felt their magics bring the opposing forces of the elements into harmony as Hermione wove blood and power, silver and pain into the wounds of their marking. Each thread of the silver worked not simply into their flesh, but into their souls. Hermione blushed a bit as Luna bared her chest with a smile, utterly unconcerned about the mixed genders, as to her eyes everyone was naked to their soul, and magic so body modesty seemed too silly to worry about. As Hermione worked the runes into Luna, she was unsurprised to see the third rune forming between her breasts was the cup shape of Pertho, the rune of secrets, occult knowledge, and also the rune of chaos and chance. This was the rune of the wild magic, the magic spells and wands cannot bind or contain. Draco was sweating and writhing against his bonds as he was marked, for his runes burned into him harsher than the others. Draco wept and raged, but when Hermione asked if she should stop, he raged and swore at her to continue. His rune was the harshest. Noth's, like a small T with the crossbar slashing down left to right like cut by a sword. It was the rune of Needfire, the rune of suffering for knowledge, the rune of prices paid, the rune that shatters stasis and ignorance both, a rune of patience and pain, and of world-shattering action. Narcissa held her place in the circle. She danced with the other witches and wizards of the outer circle that their steps and words, their intent and need could call out to magic to hear, and see what was wrought in this time and place, and weave itself into the binding. She saw her delicate boy, the over-proud and protected child she had endured a loveless marriage to produce be marked with a rune fit for a dragon. If he was to be the soul of the coven, his would be the harshest price. She felt the tears burn her face, a mother weeping for the pain of her son, pain now and pain 100-fold tomorrow, yet her steps grew fierce and wild as joy burned in her heart. Tauger's purr. He was not the weakness of his father's blood. He was hers. He was black in his heart. Her delicate little dragon would be strong. After a lovely feast in Longbottom Manor, whose wards were strong enough they did not fear ministry auras storming the place looking for the renegade, yet oddly unconvicted, Sirius Black, the group returned to the Leaky Cauldron, for that is where Cornelius Fudge would be arriving to take them back to Hogwarts for their official welcoming and awards ceremony. The negotiations, or browbeating, blackmail and bribery, with Albus Dumbledore had been concluded to no one's satisfaction but everyone's tolerance, and the minister would get his shiny, happy press moment. Narcissa sat with Sirius in her room, and after weaving her privacy wards, she finally broached the subject of her cousin's status. Since Draco was bound to Harry Potter and his coven of lunatics, his fate and his position of Lord of House Black were now critical to hers and Draco's survival and success. Sirius, this thumbing your nose at the auras and tricking the ministry is no doubt amusing to you, but you and I both have children to protect. You cannot do that when your enemies can wield the power of the ministry in the daylight and the power of both factions of the Wizargamot in the shadows. Narcissa said softly, not looking at her cousin and lord. Sirius poked unnecessarily at the fire, his face growing shadows in the firelight that made every year in Azkaban show plainly carved into the crags of his noble but now more brutal visage. I have a plan, Sissy. The ministry is giving the kids the Order of Merlin. That means over the Yule break, they will attend the Wizargamot session to take up the single seat each Order of Merlin holder gets. No regency for underage when you get an Order of Merlin. They get their seat and their vote right there. I plan on being smuggled in. When the time comes for oath-taking, it is done alphabetically. House Black will be first. Once the wardstones of the Wizigamot chamber sense the Lord of Black has entered, my name will be recorded on the Book of Law. When they read the names, mine will be first. When the Wizigamot magic allows me to swear my oath of loyalty, that will prove that I have never been convicted of any crime against the Wizigamot law. At that point, I am beyond the power of a vote to keep from my seat. The DMLE can take care of the bookkeeping to take me off the wanted list, because they will be stuck with the Book of Law's acceptance of my innocence. Magic trumps ministry. I mean, you have to love a system that is simply based on the power to splatter anyone who disagrees with you with the flick of a wand. I will hold all the Black family vassals' votes. I am Harry's godfather, and once seated, the Potter vassals' votes also become mine to vote. As an Order of Merlin holder, I can appoint Harry Potter to be my seneschal and hold the proxy for his own bloody votes. Cornelius Fudge can pack his own fudge at that point. Lucius will be left only with the Malfoy vote. None of our vassals will be his proxies. Dumbledore will be left with just his own vote. None of the Potter vassals will be his proxies. Narcissa shuddered at the boldness of the plan. You really did sort into Gryffindor for a reason. That plan is terrifying. If anything goes wrong on the way in, you will be given the Dementor's kiss on the spot. Sirius looked up from the fire and grinned. Now, Narcissa, it is almost like you care. Yes, my plan is Gryffindor bold, but I had a decade in Azkaban to get right Slytherin cold and cunning about getting it done. Don't worry, I have given the kids the task of pulling it off. The former marauder smirked. Narcissa snorted, a most unladylike noise she would deny ever having made. You are trusting those children to come up with a plan to beat the whole of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the Ministry of Magic, all the Death Eater sympathizers who need you dead, and Dumbledore who needs you gone so he can get his Ossopure hands on his precious boy who lived. Narcissa asked in surprise. Sirius leaned down and gave his cousin a hug, which she endured with the same resignation she had as kids when he was being all cheerful puppy with his baby cousin. Oh, sissy, just one of them broke me out of Azkaban because she needed a birthday present. Can you imagine what the lot of them can do if they put their heads together and really try? Sirius smiled. Cornelius Fudge ought to thank them if they don't burn the whole ministry down in sheer teenage excess before it's done. It is going to be better than any prank the Marauders ever pulled in their prime. I swear, weaponizing Hufflepuff work ethic to Slytherin cunning, it's enough to make a grown Gryffindor tremble in fear. Sirius said, then shuddered dramatically. You are going to rein them in if they get excessive. Narcissa said, hoping her cousin had matured even slightly in the decade spent dreaming of escape in Azkaban. Sirius looked shocked. Narcissa, I am shocked. I would never curb their youthful enthusiasm. The ministry is a frightful pile of ostentation. If it burns, it burns. The prank is the important thing. They will get that part right. Narcissa began to massage her forehead. She could feel a Gryffindor headache coming on. She loved her cousin, but it was only Lucius Malfoy still being alive that kept Sirius Black from topping Narcissa's list of people she wanted to murder list. Sirius and Narcissa would have cause to look back upon this discussion with horror on Narcissa's part and a mix of horror and wonder on Sirius' part. Sirius was a very powerful wizard, a warrior who struck terror in the hearts of Death Eaters when he took the field. He was also, however, the little boy who only went to the circus to watch the clowns fall down. It is entirely possible the idea of consequences would ever have the same reality as the prank to him. Cornelius Fudge and Albus Dumbledore's attempt at political theatre, with the awards ceremony turning into musical theatre, may well have been the first open shot of war between a handful of magical children and all the various evils in the wizarding world, its government and educational institution leadership among them. But it was also, in serious expert opinion, a prank of the first order. Senior Undersecretary Dolores Umbridge had been given the thankless task of briefing the children as to their expected role in their return to Hogwarts for the award ceremony. The Great Hall was packed with students, famous alumni, parents, and every Hufflepuff of note, including a few Muggle rights activists from the 1960s civil rights movement, only allowed back in the country through a special arrangement with the Irish Republic, who gave them sanctuary. The children were to be led in, introduced, brought up to the dais, while Minister of Magic Fudge would read the award, and the Senior Order of Merlin first-class holder, the champion of light himself, Headmaster Dumbledore, will pin their medal on their robes. I'm sure this sort of ceremony will be new to you, Miss Granger, as you suffer from the disability of your muggle birth. Senior Undersecretary Umbridge said with a fake smile on her toad-like face. In fact, Neville had twice slipped already and referred to her as Miss Trevor after his former suppressor Toad pet. Hermione gave the senior undersecretary a sniff and made a slight brushing off motion as if dismissing her concerns as beneath her notice. It is always interesting to see how minority populations, cut off from their parent culture, attempt to follow the half-remembered customs of old. Fortunately, Muggle Britain has never forgotten how to honor its heroes, and I have seen it done properly when my uncle SGT Ian Mackay of the Third Para received the Victoria Cross, the highest battle honor of the British Empire, for the deeds that turned the tide at the Battle of Mount Longdon at the cost of his life. Hermione looked at Umbridge coldly. The entire city was shut down, the streets barricaded for the parade, and the Queen herself gave the award. There were tens of thousands of people in attendance, but I'm sure your little school production will be quaint. Neville swore softly. Miss Trevor looks like she swallowed a dung bomb. Draco Stage whispered to Millicent, I thought there weren't any royals or nobles since the Statue of Secrecy. Millicent corrected him. The same royal house rules, but we surrendered all our noble titles. Technically our leader, the Minister of Magic, is a very junior cabinet minister in the Muggle-elected government. We just tell each incoming Muggle Prime Minister, swear them to a bunch of oaths of secrecy, and get back to ignoring each other as much as possible. Dolores Umbridge found herself shouting without noticing it. The Minister of Magic is not any sort of junior cabinet minister. He is the most important man in Britain. Certainly, the most important man in British government. Draco smiled professionally and patted her hand, saying with utter Slytherin sincerity, he is obviously the most important figure in British government. After all, he is in charge of all wizarding affairs. Millicent added, except for the ancient and noble houses of the Wizargamot, who basically order him around like a house elf. Harry chimed in. The goblins of Gringotts who use his ministerial orders in the privy when we run short on paper. Hermione added helpfully, and Hogwarts, who thanks to its charter usually thanks the minister for his thoughts and does what Dumbledore wants instead anyway. Neville smiled at the Toad Woman whose face was now darker than her pink pantsuit. But other than that, he is totally in charge. I mean not of us, but loads of other people, like you for instance. When the doors to the Great Hall opened, it was to the strange sight of Mr. Filt, wrestling Dolores Umbridge for her wand, as the students smiled and waved at the crowd, and the Sorting Hat, which was sitting smugly by Hufflepuff's cup like two old friends ready to catch up over a plate of kippers and too many drinks. Cornelius Fudge gave a 20-minute speech that managed to make it clear to everyone that it was exactly his leadership, which resulted in the kind of forward-thinking and revolutionary daring that inspired these brave children to act utterly and entirely within both the wise and prudent laws of the Wizargamot and Ministry, and in accordance with the ancient pure-blooded traditions that were the true strength of wizarding Britain. How it was possible to both be forward-thinking revolutionaries while slavishly adhering to every written rule and ancient tradition was not explained, but it was generally understood that Cornelius Fudge was the man responsible for making this possible. Dolores Umbridge stopped fighting for her wand long enough to burst into wild applause, which was dutifully followed by those students who had just then noticed Fudge had stopped talking and thought that was jolly worth a clap or two. Dumbledore gave a long, slightly sad speech about how important it was to embrace love, especially in the face of darkness, and while it would undoubtedly have been nobler and purer to have been slaughtered by the Dementors, it was probably for the best they had defended themselves, even if their choices had been rather regrettable. Pomona Sprout and Poppy Pomfrey came forward, with Cedric Diggory between them holding the Hufflepuff cup. It was not enough that these brave children, 2 years early to have even been taught the spell to protect themselves from the awful Dementors, used whatever tools and magic they possessed to save hundreds of young wizarding lives. They also found and returned to us one of the four wonders of the founders, the cup of Helga Hufflepuff. Pomona, Sprout said, and every Hufflepuff in the crowd roared. Flashes went off as photographers immortalized the presentation of the famous Hufflepuff Cup, at last returned to Hogwarts. After that, it was a long and boring ceremony, as each child was led to get his hand shaken or hers kissed by the minister, quick photo, his or her medal pressed to their chest and tapped once with Dumbledore's wand to affix, quick photo. Albus Dumbledore was more than a little irritated at having his school co-opted for Cornelius Fudge to turn into a campaign event for his re-election bid. He was further annoyed that the Sorting Hat was telling every reporter who asked that the Hufflepuff Cup was the most powerful healing artifact in the world, and that it was in fact not restricted to her blood heirs, but all of her children, the children of House Hufflepuff, could use it. Since Albus Dumbledore was a Gryffindor, this knowledge was less than helpful, although his Mediwitch Poppy Pomfrey was a Hufflepuff and could use it. That was something at least. Still, he could spin control of the cup to give him power and influence over St. Mungo's hospital, as now he had control of the cup that could cure what their finest healers could not. More than annoyed at having his great hall usurped by both the Minister of Magic and the Hufflepuff alumni, Albus decided to inflict upon the press, politicians, parents, and other parasites infesting his school the ultimate punishment. Rising to his feet, Albus Dumbledore raised his wand. Before we get to the feast, this is a time of celebration. You can't very well celebrate without music. Music is the oldest and deepest of magics, yet one sadly that is not taught at Hogwarts. Still, we have our own tradition. Those who knew what came next either winced if they had any sense of taste or shame, or grinned if they had neither, and prepared to sing the Hogwarts song. Dumbledore held up his wand. There now, everyone knows the words. Pick a tune for yourself. Since the song doesn't have one of its own, I'm sure anything you find will be good. On 3, don't worry, if the glass shatters, the elves will just replace it and sing. What Dumbledore expected to happen was the usual. Hundreds of voices singing, speaking, shrieking, howling, yodeling, rapping, and chanting, no two together in 100 keys, in as many timings. The Hogwarts song was so terrible it drove Peeves to hide in the Forbidden Forest until the unicorns chased him out again. What happened was different. Luna Lovegood strode to stand beside the Helga Hufflepuff's cup and extend her hand to it. The cup began to glow. That glow formed a crown over Luna Lovegood, Hermione Granger, and Millicent Bulstrode. They began to sing, "This I Night, This I Night." A matching crown of gold formed over Harry, Neville, Draco, Fred, and George as they stepped forward and sang the refrain. Refrain. Every night in a lair together, the rune-marked boys and girls sang the next line, and this time the whole of House Hufflepuff sang the refrain. Fire and fleet and candlelight, refrain, and magic take thy soul. As the children sang the call, and House Hufflepuff the refrain in answer, those in the audience who bore the dark mark felt it burn their skin. Blisters and angry red blood wept from where it slept under their arms, as if the very magic of life strove to reject it. Dumbledore looked upon the magic weaving from the rune-marked children and flowing from the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, and noted the Sorting Hat himself was boldly singing along with the children and glaring at him as he did. Only Minerva McGonagall was aware of the fact that the wards and stones of Hogwarts also sang the refrain, as if the call of the wild magic in the children's song was echoes by the magics in the castle, more ancient than wizarding Britain or the tame magics of the modern age. The Daily Prophet, Quibbler, Witch Weekly, and Toad Chorus Times all ran a picture of the event, one that oddly actually carried the magic to echo the song itself. The words of the song were printed, even though Cornelius Fudge had a word with the prophet that the ministry thought it might smack of forbidden magic. Sirius Black sent an owl to the same publisher reminding them of his 64% ownership and general reputation as a vengeful prat, and advised them to run it anyway. The Quibber was Luna's father's publication. Witch Weekly's owners and half the staff writers were Hufflepuffs, and the Toad Chorus Times were all mad for magical music, and as long as a toad could sing it, that was enough for them. This I night, refrain. Every night in a lair, fire and fleet and candlelight, refrain, and magic take thy soul. When thou from Hogwarts hall art passed, refrain. Every night in a lair from founders' words thy way is lost. Refrain, and magic take thy soul. If ever thou bore the darkest mark, refrain. Every night in a lair taint thy gift with cruelest work. Refrain, and magic take thy soul. If ever thou gavest magic or gold, refrain. Every night in a lair the fire soul surely make thee shrink. Refrain, and magic take thy soul. That darkest mark on arm and soul, refrain. Every night in a lair to dragon's fire thou calm'st thee at last. Refrain, and magic take thy soul. That deathless one who serpents speak, refrain. Every night in a lair shall serpent's meal himself become refrain, and magic take thy soul. This eye night, refrain. Every night in a lair, fire and fleet and candlelight, refrain, and magic take thy soul. Narcissa Black gripped Sirius Black's collar as he was sitting by her feet as a rather large black grim. Keep their heads down. Attract no attention. Do not draw the eye of the ministry, Dumbledore, or the old Death Eater families. You have been with them for less than a month, and already they are almost so Gryffindor they qualify for a disability pension. Narcissa hissed. Sirius wagged his tail happily. Cornelius Fudge was jumping up and down in rage. Dumbledore was cowering back in fright. His attempt to use his wand on Hufflepuff's cup had the cup disarm him and the Sorting Hat eat his wand. Severus Snape, Tiberius Nutt, Lucius Malfoy, Avery, Crabbe, Goyle McNair were all writhing in agony as if their dark mark were on fire. He howled to punctuate every magic take they soul, with the particular magic of a Grimm's howl that caused every marked Death Eater to feel death's cold breath upon their soul. Narcissa rolled up her program and swatted her lord and cousin on the nose. Stop that. I already neutered my husband. If I have to neuter my dog, well, House Black already has 2 fine heirs. I am willing to risk it. Narcissa said, eyeing her elder cousin, and to her eternal dismay, her lawful head of house coldly. Sirius whined, then looked back upon his heir, his godson Harry. This was the most daring prank in history. Sure, Dumbledore and Fudge would lose their minds, the Death Eaters would lose all self-control, but Merlin, damn it, what a prank, he barked happily. He wouldn't get to see the kids again until their first Quidditch match. Until then, they would get a chance to know their goduncle Remus. Granted, the werewolf still thought Sirius was a Death Eater and Peter was an innocent victim, but he was sure the kids would set him straight. Remus was always the most straight-laced of the marauders. He was so thankful for Dumbledore bending the rules to let him in that he could see no evil in the old coot. He didn't doubt Dumbledore brought Remus in to control Harry's more high-spirited, as in world-ending dangerous, exploits, but Sirius knew better. Remus had never stopped the marauders marauding. He just kept Sirius and James' ideas that couldn't possibly work from being attempted. He made a lot of the shouldn't possibly work into might just work, and nobody actually died. There was that one time with Severus, which might, in retrospect, have been a bit much. Not because Snape almost died, but because it would have given that murdering Death Eater still hiding in the Ministry, Mulciber, the chance to kill Remus for being a werewolf that bit Junior Death Eater Snape. That was early in the war when the Ministry tried to pretend wearing a dark mark that required you to torture and murder someone even to get didn't necessarily make you a criminal. How exactly a badge that said, I tortured someone to death and all I got was this cool button, did not mark you as a criminal, Sirius did not know. That is why he had stayed out of politics the last war and landed his ass in prison for 10 years because Dumbledore did play politics. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. He wasn't a dog. He was a Grim. Grims could learn new tricks. He was also a Black. That meant power politics and influence peddling were in his blood, and blackmail. Well, let's just say blackmail was so natural to the family that it was named after them. Sirius wagged his tail. He was worried when he heard Harry sorted into Hufflepuff and consorted with Slytherins, but the lad has big goblin silver balls you need a Gringotts cart to carry and no sense of self-preservation at all. He didn't need one. He had Godfather Sirius to keep him alive. Let his little Hufflepuff do the right thing honestly and openly. Godfather Sirius will poison, stab, blackmail, and seduce anyone who gets in the way. It was what a responsible adult would do. 37. Chapter 37, Boggart's Bad Day. Bestest baby, shouted Fred across the great hall, Brother Draco. cheered George as they descended upon Draco Malfoy with arms spread and clear intent to hug. Draco looked petrified on the Slytherin table. Years of training, as the pureblood heir of Malfoy, had prepared him for slander, poison, curse, dagger, sword, bullet, bludger, letherfolds in the closet, and vampires in dark corridors. Group hugs in public had shockingly not been part of his training. He was horrified as his new Arculement's ability to create a second thought stream decided to express itself with drafting a letter of admonishment to Mother for the lasp, rather than coming up with an adequate defense for public hugging. The crack of a whip sounded like thunder, and Draco felt his hair shift in the breeze and his cheek flutter with the single cut strand of it as the whip passed within molecules of his skin to lash about one charging Weasley's ankles. One hard yank landing said twin on his arse while detaching the whip. Millicent Bulstrode stood on the Slytherin dining table, a black serpentine whip extending magically from her wand. Bad Weasleys. Sit. Stay. Millicent shouted imperiously, her whip cracking out again, this time catching the second Weasley not across the ankles, but across the bum as he spun and stuck it in the path of the whip with the same reflexes a rational being would have used to dodge it. The shock of impact drove him face down on the floor next to his twin, a grin on his face. "You have," accused Fred, a fetish. Agreed George, jealous. Inquired George, totally. Agreed Fred. Fred admired the bloody gash in George's pants, and Millicent very pointedly ignored pleading looks to give him a matching one. Ravenclaw table did their best to ignore it. Hufflepuff had given up eating, speaking, and breathing to better catch all of the memory for future gossip. Millicent sighed and accepted Draco's proffered hand to step back down onto the bench to resume breakfast. The looks the two of them were receiving from Slytherin were at least as horrified as the looks the twins were receiving from Gryffindor. Ron was as red as his hair and shouting at his brothers, while Percy was looking like he would be several minutes and a calming draught from being able to speak. Ginny Weasley, on the other hand, was laughing so hard her bench mate's arms were the only reason she hadn't fallen off the bench. Draco fumed for a minute or two, looking for the old Malfoy public pride, but finding it shattered into bits and pieces from Tom Riddle's breaking of him, and not really worth rebuilding in the new and somewhat unexplored new Draco Malfoy he was learning to be. What am I going to do about those idiots? They know the whole thing isn't true. Mother used the Veritas serum, and I did the blood inheritance ritual, so even Father had to admit it was a lie. Still, the fact he was willing to believe it already had Mother halfway around the bend before he tried to feed me to his Dark Lord as a snack. Millicent shrugged so slightly only another Slytherin could notice and spoke softly, because rather than whispers that carried forever, soft speech died within a few feet in the echoing great hall. If you were Weasley, you could just hug it out. The hug out everything. You could be Malfoy and immediately do something public rash and stupid. Or you could be Black and smile softly, as if mildly amused. Then when Io, Callisto, and Ganymede next cast the black shadow upon Jupiter, flip a coin to see if you will enact a vengeance that fills the streets with blood and darkens the skies with crows, or have an extra slice of pie for dessert. Millicent suggested. Draco let a laugh slip out. That was Father and Mother in a nutshell. Merlin, but he came with baggage. He wasn't going to hug it out, and public overreaction had really not served him well so far. It must be wonderful to come from family traditions that were all not deeply disturbing and counterproductive. Maybe not huggy traditions, but something between genocide and group singing must be possible. Remus Lupin saw Severus Snape fighting the urge to go for his own wand, and the hard lines on the other professor's face, and realized Remus was not the only one who felt Harry's friends reminded them of the Marauders back in their heyday. Considering how much of their heyday had been spent waging a take, no prisoners prank war in a deliberate attempt to publicly humiliate anyone who espoused public support for Voldemort and the Knights of Walpurgis, Death Eater being a name they didn't yet admit in public. It was understandable that Severus held a grudge. As an adult, it was possible to admit his best friends were bullies and excused their general excesses by the fact that some of their targets were legitimately evil. Many of the rest were just calling the Marauders on their bullshit, which Remus felt less than proud of all these years later. Neville and Hermione were looking on in shock and horror as Harry explained in detail what whips and chains had to do with fetishes. Goblin sex education was far broader and a lot more deeply disturbing than anything Hogwarts health classes with Poppy Pomfrey would cover. Several of the other Hufflepuffs looked alarmed. They had not thought to bring quill and parchment to take notes. Remus sighed. How had Harry ended up almost more serious than James, given no exposure at all? He flinched, remembering how Sirius had betrayed James and Lily in the end. Frowning. Or had he? Peter's murder was the proof, and Sirius presumed confession at his trial. Except Peter somehow died at Hogwarts last term, and Sirius may not ever have received a trial. James, Lily, I know I was never there for Harry when he needed me, but with you lost, and without Dumbledore's protection, I couldn't even support myself as a werewolf in London, let alone take on a child. Now I have Dumbledore's protection, and I want to help make Harry safe, and maybe teach him like you would have, but I don't even know him. Remus swore, thinking of his coming dark arts class. Well, there was one thing he remembered from taking Dada as a marauder. Finding out what each of them feared had bonded the four like nothing else. Sirius collapsing in front of a charging and hateful Wahlburger Black stuck in his head. The face you show the world is a mask. As a werewolf, he knew this more than most. It was your fears that spoke to your core, and how you faced them spoke to the lessons you took away from those formative trauma. It had taken Remus about 2 hours' work to redo the wards in the Dada classroom to let the boggart out of its cabinet. Whatever the song had done to the wards of Hogwarts, it had activated parts of the wards that had never been awake when Remus was a student. Parts that both could identify dark creatures and could target them. The Dada classrooms, as dedicated spaces to work on defending against dark arts and creatures, had potential overrides built in. No one had needed them in generations, and given no Dada professor had lasted more than a year since Tom Riddle was denied the post in 1945, it wasn't like the information got passed down. Remus wrote them down. At least whoever followed wouldn't have to beg Mrs. Pins in the library for access to the old instruction manuals. The boggart was now free to use its power to its fullest extent without fear of Hogwarts wards pinning it in a cage of fire and dropping several tons of ceiling on it. Remus sat waiting for his students in the Dada classroom. He expected Harry and his friends to stake out the back of the class like the Marauders did. That was fine. Remus had spent his school days using that dodge, and he remembered how professors like Flitwick and McGonagall had countered it. Now Merlin help him. He was the teacher. His first class was Gryffindor and Hufflepuff. Harry and 2 of his friends were Hufflepuff, and in this class, you could learn a lot about someone by who they chose to associate with. James had adopted the black outcast Sirius, the bookish werewolf Lupin, and the picked-on mama's boy Pettigrew. James collected broken people and dragged them alone on adventures until whatever trouble they were in now made their past problems irrelevant and trivial. It was a very Gryffindor therapy. Harry was a Hufflepuff. Who and what had he gathered? Harry, Hermione, and Neville took their places up front, which was the least marauder-like behavior Remus could imagine, but he supposed that was the Hufflepuff influence. Hermione already had her book out to the reference page he had written on the board and was already instructing Harry and Neville about what that implied they were studying. The snake that Harry had worn coming into the classroom had slithered off to the cabinet where it was swaying back and forth in a threat display that Remus thought was interesting. It was just a snake. It couldn't possibly know there was a boggart in there. Remus grinned. Hermione was him, the scholar among the jocks. He remembered Neville and Harry were both Hufflepuff beaters. Sirius had been a beater and James a seeker. James was the glory hound, and Sirius just liked the violence. Yes, Harry definitely had more Sirius in him. This would be messy. Sirius' fears were not the sort of thing that were pretty to watch. Remus spoke softly, forcing the class to pay attention to his words. What we are going to study today is called esoteric magic. Can anyone tell me what that is? Unsurprisingly, Hermione's hand shot up first, but a Ravenclaw named Padma Patil was a close second. Miss Patil, Remus said, pointing to the young Ravenclaw. Esoteric magic is the school of magic that is not described in arithmancy. Its effects are not adequately or completely described in the linear equations based on spell formula, power input, will, and intent alone. Padma Patil said firmly. Remus nodded. Well done, Miss Pattle. From an arithmancy point of view, that is a full and complete answer, but here in Dada it is not, so only 3 of the 5 points. Miss Granger, if you would like to clean up, what did she miss? Remus continued, pointing at Hermione. Emotions or esoteric magic is the only school of magic in which the emotional state of the caster directly affects the success and potency of the spell. Hermione said. Remus nodded emphatically. Yes, yes. Well done, Miss Granger, well done. 2 points Hufflepuff. Esoteric magic is based on emotion, so the arithmetic descriptors of arithmancy fail to adequately predict or contain the requirements and effects of the spell. Its reliance on emotion puts in on the border between the real and the unreal, the physical and the immaterial. Why is that important to Dada, anyone? Remus said, turning his eyes to the class. He found Harry staring right back at him, meeting his gaze with neither arrogance nor fear. He met his gaze as if across a dueling field, no malice, but no mercy either. Because not everything we need to fight is real. Harry said. Terry Boot laughed. Come on, Potter, even you can face something that isn't real. I mean, it isn't like anyone with half a brain thinks those stories about you facing all those creatures, and you know who could be real. Remus smiled. Ah, Mr. Boot, well done, Ravenclaw. I do love a volunteer. Very well, you will be the first one to show how little there is to fear from the unreal. What I have in this cabinet is not real. It is a boggart. A boggart is a being of the unreal. Muggles confuse the unreal with things that don't exist. Witches and wizards, of course, are smarter than that, and are aware the unreal is all that might be, that could have been, and in the boggart's case, we fear might be. A boggart's weapon is fear, as is its food. It is unreal, and has only the power you give it. Fear is the power you give it, so laughter is what takes that power away. The boggart has no form of its own, so when I open the cabinet door, it will look into the soul and mind of the person facing it and adopt the form of its fear. You will then cast the spell Ridiculous. Using the wand movement I show here, simply carve a question mark in the air and thrust forward as the point at the bottom, thinking firmly of the most ridiculous thing you could turn that fear into. This is important. You will be afraid. In that moment of fear, you must master yourself. Master yourself to master your magic. If you allow the boggart to master your fear, it will begin to feed upon your magic. Your will in this case must not simply overcome the boggart's control of your magic, but of your mood. You must feel the urge to laugh at your fear in order to defeat it. Terry had remembered staying safe in his car on the Hogwarts Express while the windows iced over and the girl who looked outside collapsed on the floor. Clearly, she had been weak. Terry had studied occlumency, and clearly he had command of his own mind. Wand in hand, he strode before the cabinet and made a gesture for Professor Lupin to open it. The snake looked at student, then teacher, then over to Harry, who hissed something at him, causing the snake to sulkily crawl out of the way. Remus opened the cabinet, and Terry began the wand movement, exaggerating it like Lockhart at his finest, shouting his ridiculous. Even as he got his first look at what boiled out of the cabinet, a wash of cold filled the room, and Terry felt like every good feeling in his life had been a lie. He was not strong. He was not smart. His mother was brilliant. His mother had got all O's on her owls and newts. Why was he struggling to get E's on his tests? The Dementor leaned down to him, the hood flaring to allow the face to loom over him. Terry felt his wand fall from his fingers as the Dementor leaned in for a kiss. Oh, Merlin. His first real test, and the truth came out. He was a coward, a weakling, a failure, better off dead. Terry Boot accepted his death, and the Dementor leaned in. Just then Remus Lupin stepped between them, and the boggart was suddenly a shining full moon before Lupin made the question mark wand motion and poked the moon firmly with his wand, shouting, "Ridiculous." The moon popped like a balloon and shot once in a circle around the room before slamming back into the cabinet and slamming the doors behind it. Remus Lupin smiled at his students, now firmly having gotten their attention. Esoteric magic is not something memorizing and control of your thoughts will be enough to skate through. Occlumency to shut off negative emotions will not help you. You need to actually master and muster your positive emotions to make it work. The spell Ridiculous is effective against boggarts, as it takes the power of the unreal and turns it back upon itself. Fear or laughter, each are forms of chaos and madness that rule the unreal. The boggart cannot defend itself against the very thing it feeds upon. Later this year, we will learn the Patronus charm, a higher form of esoteric magic that takes a positive or happy memory and weaponizes that power as a defense against those creatures of the dark, whose darkness and hatred extend beyond the boundaries of reality and into the unreal. This is the only weapon against lethofolds and dementors, but it is also effective against werewolves, wendigo, inferi, and vampires. If its hatred extends beyond reality, the unreal may be used against it. Esoteric magic extends beyond reality. Emotion rules the unreal. To master emotion is to master unreality. Your journey to master this magic is to master yourself. Ridiculous is the first step. Form a line. Everyone gets a turn. Remus smiled at his class. They were no longer smiling back. He could smell the fear on many of them. Good. Too many felt the controlled conditions they learned their spells in class under were a measure of how they could use the spell in combat. He had been taught in a classroom. It had failed him the first time he needed it. Only the hatred of the wolf inside him had spared his life, but not his date that night. She had been broken by the Dementor, because in the face of its soul-destroying despair, neither one of them could form the happy memory to wield their Patronus. He would teach them against boggarts, but if they could master their emotions against the lesser psychic predator, they would be prepared to face the greater. The snake was hissing loudly, and he looked back to see Neville Longbottom and the snake Noodle leaning over Terry Boot, hissing at each other and staring into his eyes. Casting some quick detection spells, he noticed what he should have seen earlier. The boy was in shock. Oddly, magic was flowing from the snake and Neville to the boy, as if they were joined together. Soon the snake began to sway, and then the boy with it. After a while, the boy's eyes grew wide and began to tear. Neville then gripped the boy's shoulders and whispered something to him. The wildness went out of the boy's eyes, and soon he was breathing normally and nodding. Remus, nonplussed, simply asked, "Who would like to go next?" Neville snarled as he stood. "I will." Remus' notes on Longbottom had been possible, squib, shy, nervous. Of course, those had been from Quirrell in first year. Lockhart's notes had been mostly about female students and their degree of attractiveness and suggestibility. Those he had burned. Something was clearly different about this third-year Longbottom. Remus opened the cabinet, and a wizard in the Unspeakable's grey robes, with the face blurring magics activated, stormed out. "You are a squib, a coward and a shame to the House of Longbottom. I am doing the house a favor removing you." Remus looked at the boy, expecting to see an emotional wreck, but instead the Longbottom boy simply and somewhat sadly stated, "Hello, Uncle Algy. Ridiculous." Vines shot out of the cabinet, grabbing the Unspeakable around both wrists and ankles, around his neck, before another tendril undid his belt and began yarding down the Unspeakable's pants. As the boggart was dragged in Tarty cabinet, the shrieking of the Unspeakable could be heard. "Not there, no, that is not an indoor." While the class broke out into laughter, the boy Neville suddenly looked horrified, then turned to whisper to Harry and Hermione. "Did I ever tell the house elves to let Uncle Algy out of Greenhouse 3? Harry snickered, and Hermione answered casually, "I'm sure it was taken care of," in tones that made it clear she would be happier if Uncle Algy, the eternal attempted murderer, never made it out of Greenhouse 3 and had zero intention of inquiring. Remus blinked. He had remembered Hufflepuffs being fluffier, not so hardcore. Then again, Mad-Eye Moody was a Hufflepuff, and that boy was somewhat scarier than a Dementor on Dragonback. He guessed teachers learned too. The next student was Terry Boot again, this time with Nigel standing right behind him. The Dementor charged out of the cabinet, and Terry roared out, "Ridiculous!" The Dementor tripped on his robe and fell face first on the ground, rolling around in obvious pain, having broken both wrists on the stone trying to catch itself. This time, the whole class laughed. Remus worked through more of the students with ease, having one bad moment when Padma Patil saw her own mother burst forth screaming about having a marriage contract with caretaker Filch. He was expecting some sort of feminine breakdown, but Padma's cold, ridiculous, summoned a very jealous Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, who chased Padma's mother around the room before she bolted back into the cabinet and locked it behind her. Hermione's was unexpected. Auror Dawlish came storming out. He didn't have a wand in his hand. He had a paintbrush. "I must paint you again. You are my muse, my inspiration, my goddess." Oro Dawlish, now with only one arm and obsessed with painting the muggle-born witch who had saved his life, charged her with paint-brush in hand and canvas hanging behind him. Hermione shouted, "Ridiculous!" From her wand came a parchment which unrolled and began to burn its letters into the air. "What is this?" the Oro Dawlish said in horror. "This is a cease and desist order, a copyright challenge. A notice of violation of the Official Secrets Act, as what happened in the Chamber of Secrets, was classified, cut your throat before reading and oblivate the corpse, not paint it in oil and hang it in the ministry atrium, you total pure-blood bigoted piece of corrupt crap," Hermione roared. The Aura had the legal parchment wrap him up, still burning, and pack him into the cabinet. Hermione threw her arms back and shouted, "Morgana's magical muffin, that was fabulous," Hermione shouted, doing a legitimate happy dance. Whirling to Professor Lupin, she grinned. "This is better than therapy. I love it. Can we go again?" Remus decided right then and there Hufflepuffs were deeply wrong on levels no Gryffindor could fully comprehend. He made a shooing gesture to send her back to her seat. Harry's turn was something Remus was ready for. When the boy came face to face with Voldemort, Remus would be ready to step in. Harry needed to know he was not alone. Harry needed to turn to Remus to guide and mentor him, or when he faced the real Voldemort, he would not be ready. James was not here. Sirius was not here. It fell to Remus to fix things, the way Remus had always fixed things when the famous Marauder plans went pear-shaped. Harry stood before the cabinet. Remus opened it. Voldemort crawled out. Remus blinked. Voldemort bled from 100 wounds, and a basilisk had him by the ankles, already beginning to swallow him. Remus went a step forward, but froze from what stepped into existence over a screaming Voldemort. Lilly Potter, Remus froze. "Stay out of this, Remus. I don't have the time here to explain," Lily said, frowning at Professor Lupin before looking at Harry softly. "Harry, you know this had to be. You have to be ready to let me go," Lily said softly. Harry stood, tears streaming down his face. "What if I am not ready?" he said, his voice somewhere between a rasp and a scream. Lily walked towards him slowly. "Then he will kill everyone you love, everyone who depends on you. He will kill everyone who gives your life meaning, because that is all he is capable of. He isn't even human anymore. He has so little soul left, all he is rage and hatred. Until you put him in the grave, he will keep punishing the world because he can't love it." Harry screamed, "Then you will die." Lily screamed back, "And you will live." Harry's face went cold. He pointed his wand at Voldemort, who screamed and writhed on the ground, and whispered, "Ridiculous." The basilisk swelled in size and gulped Voldemort down in several bites. Each time it took another bite. As the fangs sank into Voldemort, bite marks would appear in Lily, and as Voldemort died, she screamed and faded into nothing. Turning to stalk from the room, Harry Potter pointed to the door and screamed, "Reducto!" And the door blew itself into pieces, its wards and oak failing against the bottomless well of rage and terrifying well of power inside Harry Potter. As Remus froze, Luna Lovegood stepped past him to the boggart. The room suddenly filled with a kaleidoscope of color and strange, discordant music. Every straight line began to bend, and the space between objects both shrank and stretched, as if the fabric of reality wavered. Luna stood before the boggart, who seemed to be woven of unformed madness, as it held up a crown and placed it upon her head. Luna simply stretched out her hand and touched the boggart. "Rest now," she said softly. "Perthro." She spoke the rune of chaos, and bound once again cause to effect, and bound the unreal within time and space, as much as would ever fit there. The cabinet stayed firmly shut when Lupin tested it. Patting Professor Remus Lupin on the shoulder, she stopped and gave him a hug. "It was a very good first-class professor," she said, then trotted after her friends, making sure Harry didn't destroy any load-bearing portions of the castle as he stormed back to the Hufflepuff dormitory. Looking at the stunned students, Remus gave up and shrugged. "Class dismissed. Go to lunch." Remus looked upon the disaster of his plans and assured himself that at least the Gryffindor Slytherin class would go smoother. Hours later, he would have evidence that proved Slytherin and Gryffindor could indeed be at least as disturbing as Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw. He supposed it should be blamed on Miss Bulstrode. All had been within normal parameters until her turn. Standing in front of the cabinet, looking elaborately bored, Millicent Bulstrode made the hand-rolling gesture to Professor Lupin, encouraging her to get on with it. He had seen the icy resolve of Slytherins and the stoic courage of Gryffindors both break in the face of their secret fears. This child thought her mask was truth, and that was not enough to face a boggart. You had to know yourself. He opened the door, and Lord Selwyn stepped out, in full Death Eater regalia, with his mask slid back to reveal his face. Half-blood scum, filthy mud-blood bitch daring to pollute the sacred House Selwyn, he raged, wand coming up. Even Remus was shaken by the hatred and power coming off the figure. Miss Bulstrode simply snorted. Ridiculous, she said flatly, making the wand motion, which resulted in Lord Selwyn glancing at his left forearm as his sleeve appeared to attempt to wriggle. Millicent Bulstrode raised her left hand and turned it, showing the Lord's ring of House Selwyn and tapping it with her wand. You have one chance to kneel and beg, then things get ugly. Now, skill-testing question. Whose ring? The boggart swelled to at least 9 feet in height, shadows growing around it like a cloak, magic swirling around it like a growing storm. You dare to face the rightful Lord Selwyn. Millicent Bulstrode turned to the class, shocking Professor Lupin. Those of you looking to pursue Muggle studies beyond the owl level will note what you are about to see is called hentai. Those of you who find you are interested in this should see Cassius Warrington, Slytherin prefect, and all-around degenerate who has an extensive collection filling entirely a space-expanding trunk. Those of you requiring therapy afterwards should book time with Noodle. He will be available to sequester images of tentacles going places tentacles ought not to go, as the late Lord Selwyn is about to experience. Millicent concluded, rather like a Muggle stewardess giving the seat belt and life preserver lesson on those airplane rides Remus had been forced to use to get around werewolf travel restrictions. With Shark Remus turned to see the dark mark under the boggart, Lord Selwyn's sleeve sprouted a mass of tentacles that went on to do various deeply disturbing things, until Millicent was done enjoying the suffering of her first real enemy, the man who had forced a child to kill for the first time. With a sigh, she flicked her wrist and banished it back into the cabinet, then shook her finger at the class. Remember, witches and gentle wizards, the dark mark does not come with a warning label, warranty, or any form of return for customers experiencing buyer's remorse. Use at your own risk and be damned in so doing. The last phrase no longer delivered as a joke, but a cold threat. Millicent Bulstrode, Lady Selwyn by right of conquest, was done with Death Eaters. She was not Dumbledore. She did not buy, sell, or trade second chances. It was safe to say all the Gryffindors were in need of chocolate, therapy, and brain bleach at this point, and the Slytherins who were at least masking their own distress were sneering at their weakness. This proved a strategic error when Draco Malfoy stood before the boggart cabinet. He was working himself up to face Tom Riddle, who had almost eaten his soul, or his father, Lucius Malfoy, who had sent the diary to Hogwarts, willing to risk his only son as long as Voldemort's needs were met. Of course he got Arthur Weasley. He loomed like some rumpled version of a Dark Lord, maybe a Dork Lord, his hand extended in entreaty or perhaps temptation. Search your feelings, you know it to be true. I am your father. Draco felt the need to scream defiance at the universe for mocking him so, but then he saw Luna's face in his mind and he smiled. Ridiculous. Draco sneered. It was a very good sneer. He had missed it. Minister Fudge has foreseen this, but together we can overcome him. We can rule the misuse of Muggle artifacts division as father and son. Draco remembered Millicent's words of lunchtime. Weasley's hug it out, so mote it be. If you only knew the power of a Weasley hug, face me, father. Hug it out like a true Dork Lord, Draco shouted, advancing on the boggart with arms wide and smile bordering madness. Wait, no, back off. What are you doing? The boggart said, retreating around Remus, but Draco maneuvered to keep facing the boggart, denying it the chance to hide in some less weird fears. Hug me, Daddy. Tell me about plugs and eclectricity, Draco said as he stalked the terrified boggart until it bolted for the cabinet and slammed it shut behind him. A second later, a reptilian hand came out and hung a sign, "Keep out," on the handles. Draco was laughing softly, as the whole of House Slytherin, save Millicent, looked on him in horror as if he ate a live baby by hand while wearing a Chudley cannon bib and without using the proper knife and fork at all. Ron Weasley looked on in absolute frozen terror, unnoticed by Draco Malfoy, as he drank in the shock of his own house with a smile of smug satisfaction that was as much a missed companion as his earlier sneer. Getting in touch with your feelings was easier to weaponize than he thought. Hufflepuffs should come with warning labels. They are more dangerous than he was told. Ron Weasley faced the door prepared for anything, he thought. Gryffindor courage, he was a Weasley after all. They were poor but honest, not the sharpest tools in the shed, sure, but not a coward among them. Marley Weasley stepped out of the door, patting a surprised Remus Lupin on the shoulder. "Thank you, Remus, dear," the boggart Marley said. "Ronald, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but you were adopted. We found you among the cabbages being raised by garden gnomes. Well, Fred and George used you to test potions on, and when you turned pure ginger, we took it as fate and adopted you. We are sure you are no more than half garden gnome, and love you just as much as a real boy. Not as much as Bill, he was head boy, or Percy, he was also head boy, or even as much as Charlie as he was Quidditch captain. Not as much as the twins, obviously, as there are two of them, and both adorable. Not as much as Ginny, she is the only girl, and both quite a bit cuter and brighter than you, but certainly we love you a lot. I mean, with whatever is left." Marley smiled and Ron Weasley collapsed. He muttered, "Ridiculous, ridiculous, ridiculous," tears streaming out his shut eyes as Remus stepped forward to block Marley from reaching the broken and traumatized Ron. The boggart took the familiar form of the moon, and Remus banished it back into the cabinet. Draco looked upon Ron Weasley, the blood traitor, the muggle-loving, ignorance-embracing idiot example of everything he despised about Gryffindors, and swore softly to himself, or at himself. "Idiot, idiot, idiot. I am an idiot. Morgana, save me. Mother will cut off my bits and wear them as earrings if she ever finds out about this." As Draco Malfoy, the boy slowly coming back together after Tom Riddle ate his soul, and a ginger mudblood ghost chose to save his pure blood idiot self, decided to pay it forward. He knelt down and gripped Ron's shoulder. "Buck up, Weasley. Boggarts are lies. They don't dig up secrets, they dig up fears. You are as much an ignorant ginger prat as the rest of your brothers. You are Weasley born and bred. Now man up and think. I mean, garden gnomes are like a foot tall. How would that even work? I swear upon my name, you are a Weasley." Ron looked up at Draco, and Draco's cold gaze pierced the fog in Ron's own eyes, and Ron grasped onto Draco's words as if they were a lifeline. With a sob, he grabbed Draco in a crushing hug and sobbed brokenly. Draco glared at Millicent Bulstrode as he found himself patting the Gryffindor Weasley uncomfortably on the back, wishing now he would have memorized how Longbottom and Potter made it look somehow natural, so he could at least fake it. Millicent shrugged and muttered, "I warned you that you would end up hugging it out." Draco glared at her before muttering, "Do not laugh at me." Millicent shook her head. "No, not for this." They shared the look of children who had already lived through trauma that no child should have to experience often enough to become connoisseurs of pain. Let fools who had never suffered laugh. They understood better. Remus Lupin looked upon his students and frowned. Either things had changed a great deal since he had been a student here, or he had as many prejudices to shed as Sirius and Severus did. Wasn't that a disturbing thought? For a first day in Dada, it was enough to drive a werewolf to drink. Luckily, in third year, he learned who had the good booze in Hogwarts. Sitting in McGonagall's office that evening, Remus outlined his day to an amused-looking McGonagall. "Remus, now that we are fellow professors, I'm supposed to rise above my feelings about your student days, but since you are drinking my scotch in my office, I am going to indulge myself." She smiled. "Do you remember all those days when you, James, Sirius, and Peter would alternate between pleading ignorance and innocence, the first one I will grant you, and snickering at the fact that you were indeed guilty and quite pleased with yourself?" Remus winced. "Now, Minnie, that was a long time ago, and we were innocent children." McGonagall raised her hand. "I asked if you remember, Remus, not if you regret it." Remus sighed. "Yes, I remember." Minerva McGonagall raised her scotch, sipped it, let it roll around in her mouth as she let the flavor explode on her palate as she rolled a memory across her mind to do the same. "Do you remember," the old witch began, "how I hoped one day you would be in my position and get a taste of how it feels?" Remus gave his former head of house a hurt look. "Now, Minnie, that is a little petty, isn't it?" McGonagall tried to hold it in, but the laughter made her snort and then cackle like a mad witch. eventually pounding on the table with a small, delicate fist, tears streaming down her face, and a look of transcendent joy upon her face. Grinning, she refilled both their glasses. Oh, sweet Merlin, it was even more glorious than I dreamed. McGonagall cackled madly as she clinked glasses with the depressed werewolf, then drank her scotch with the sort of uncomplicated joy those who knew her back in her student days would have remembered fondly. Remus tried to wallow in self-pity, but it was good scotch, and you didn't survive as a marauder without a well-developed sense of humor. Remus began laughing too. It was time to throw his preconceptions of Harry Potter and his friends aside. Dumbledore had sold him a fairy tale, and Remus had believed it, but the kids don't fit the story Dumbledore was selling. Remus would judge for himself. Of all the marauders, he was the scholar. Well, time to study Harry Potter and the new version of the Marauders. In the shadows of a very expensive club in Diagon Alley, Lucius Malfoy sipped a drink. If you don't know its name, you were not put down on its membership list when you were born. You couldn't buy your way in, couldn't force your way in. This was a club that existed only for gentlemen of exceptional breeding, of unmatched purity. A club to indulge those tastes that lesser beings, which described virtually everyone, and most especially everyone in government, frequently frowned upon. "I say, Walden," said Lucius to Walden McNair, one of the Death Eaters acquitted by Sirius Black's so-called confession, the transcript of the trial that never happened. "Do you have the sample of Black's hair from his trial?" McNair snorted into his drink. "Of course not. Didn't get a trial, did he?" Lucius smiled. "How about his aura sample? All auras have to give one, don't they?" McNair snarled. "Can't get to those. Active or retired auras samples are held tight behind wards. I would need an order from the Wizigamot countersigned by the head of the DMLE to get at those." Lucius smirked. "Yes, but when he got sent to Azkaban, tried or not, his sample was removed from the secure aura files and put into the simple evidence files. Since it has been this long, it's probably in the cold case files now. They have less security than my father's erotic art collection." McNair looked up. "Yeah, that I can get to. Why do you want to? I mean, if they could have tracked him down with that, they would have already." Lucius' smile broadened and showed teeth. "Why, the problem we have with Sirius is that there is no evidence to convict him, which makes the evidence to exonerate us somewhat problematic. If there were new evidence to convict him of new crimes, then he can go back to Azkaban, suffer a tragic accident, and all of his assets can again slip into my dear Draco's inheritance. Given Draco's eternal lack of spine, I can have him restored into a usable heir inside of 6 weeks without Lord Black and the damned Black family primacy in my marriage contract tying my hands with my own bloody son." McNair snorted. "Won't help. Gringotts told the Wizigamot that Sirius made that Potter brat his heir already. You won't inherit anything, and Draco will get maybe a sip from the golden cup, not the bloody fountain." Lucius examined his nails carefully. "My dear Walden, what crime do you think our Sirius is going to be convicted of? The shocking murder of Harry Potter. Black family madness. All that time in Azkaban, honestly, Cornelius Fudge is so scared the truth will bring his government down, he would believe anything that kept Black from taking his seat in the Wizigamot and daring to testify about what was done to him." McNair began to laugh. His job as the executioner for the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures made him technically an enforcement officer of the Wizigamot, if not the DMLE. He could get into the cold case files for the sample of Sirius Black's hair that was pulled from his aura files to compare to the non-existent bit taken at his arrest. Lucius was a rather good potioner. Polyjuice had been a common Death Eater tool in the past. The old ways were always best. Looks like another tragic year at Hogwarts was due. 38. Chapter 38, Take Me Seriously. In Hogsmeade, Lucius Malfoy looked in the mirror and frowned. The polyjuice potion he had made was perfect. Charms was his mastery, but he had still gotten an outstanding in his potions newt. The problem was his hair from Sirius had been from 1979, when Sirius became an aura. To say he had been changed by a war, followed by over a decade in Azkaban, was putting it mildly. No silver in his hair, his face had the boyish roguishness that made him such a charmer, and his body had the over-muscled thuggishness of a Gryffindor who thought that gym was a wonderful class. rather than something you gave up as soon as you were allowed your wand. Lucius smirked. Sirius had been his only rival for best looking back in his Hogwarts days, which annoyed him as he was 2 years older, and having to compete at 17 with a 15-year-old was frankly embarrassing. Losing was worse, of course, but revenge is a dish that only grows sweeter when allowed to marinate a few years. Lucius was now the better looking of the two at the best of times, but now he was even a better looking Sirius than Sirius was. Lucius laughed until he looked down. Damn you, Narcissa. Merlin take your black soul. His wand and potion bottles were still missing. His twig and berries, his manhood. That pure-blooded bitch had cursed his manhood right off of him during her voiding of the marriage contract so thoroughly that magic refused to let him borrow a pair of someone else's bollocks while stealing the rest of Sirius' body. I got all of his muscles, except the one I wanted. Oh, sure, Lucius had to hear about the Gryffindor Golden Boys when he was in school. It took all his Slytherin self-control to not react when a witch he had seduced into a broom cupboard would compare wands she had known before. Finding out his fiancée's cousin Sirius was known to be seriously hung, or that the Potter boy, that's why they call me Prongs, was similarly gifted, was annoying then. Now since Narcissa cursed his wand right off his hips, he didn't simply have a shorter wand than the wizard he was impersonating. He didn't have so much as a stir stick to stir a cauldron. Fine. He had laughed at Tiberius not back in the day when he got caught doing it, but needs must when Morgana's flying. He took a pair of avocado and a cucumber. Applying a sticking charm so they would stay in approximately anatomical position, he transfigured them slightly to be even better approximations and advertisements, then pulled on Sirius-style too tight leather pants. The students were off to Hogsmeade Village for their first Hogsmeade weekend. The notorious escaped criminal Sirius Black would make it a memorable one. Kill a few of Harry Potter's comrades, stun and capture his dear, easily manipulated Draco, and he could sit back and let the Dementors catch and kiss the real Sirius Black, while he beat his heir back into proper obedience and worship. He had ruled wizarding Britain in all but name, where even his Dark Lord failed. No jumped-up brat was going to take it away from him. Lucius Malfoy had succeeded in taking over the same wizarding Britain Voldemort had sought, and he had used Slytherin cunning rather than brute force to do it. He didn't need Narcissus Black's fortune and name. He didn't need Voldemort's Death Eater network and forbidden magics. Lucius Malfoy was enough to do it himself. No one could take it away. They would take him seriously. Lucius Malfoy was no man to be mocked. In Hogwarts, headed to Hogsmeade, Draco Malfoy looked at Luna Lovegood. He used all his Slytherin self-discipline, but finally broke as she adjusted her hair so the earrings would be more visible. "Are those radishes?" he asked finally in exasperation. "Don't go there, Draco," Harry warned. Luna hugged Draco and grinned. "Yes, all the pretty people are wearing vegetables to Hogsmeade today. The Nargles are singing about it." Draco tried hard to stay on topic, even though Luna's answer, like all her answers, begged 100 other questions. "But why radishes?" Luna held her ears protectively. "Avocado are heavy and would hurt my ears." Then she giggled, punching Draco lightly in the arm. "And I can't wear a cucumber at all, silly, I'm a girl." Draco opened and closed his mouth as the circuits relating to language comprehension in his brain burned out and reset a dozen times before he simply shook his head and gave it up as a bad job. "We warned you, Draco. Her answers are like a stunner that just ignores shields and follows you when you dodge," Neville said, patting the poor Slytherin on the back. Luna looked worried. "Aren't the radishes pretty? Should I have worn avocado instead? I do want to look pretty for you on my first Hogsmeade date." Luna said, her sparkling blue eyes beginning to tear up. Now this he knew. Proper date behavior had been drilled into him by Narcissa Black. Whatever else Draco Malfoy was, a properly trained pure-blood heir to a noble house, drilled in ass-kissing and flattery from the cradle, his training carried him through the storm that was Luna Lovegood's first date, as well as any wizard ever faced a storm. "The radishes are lovely, and bring out the color of your cheeks most perfectly," Draco said, taking up Luna's hands and kissing them. Millicent Bulstrode smacked Fred and George firmly on the back of their heads. "Why can't you Gryffindors be that suave?" Millicent snarked. "Because then you won't," began George. "Smack us." Cheered Fred Millicent smirked, then turned and gave them a hooded and smoky glance. "But I might spank you." She set out at a walk bordering on a trot, with two startled Gryffindor upper years chasing after her, shouting half-remembered bits of sonnets and popular lines from wizard wireless soap opera romances in an attempt to earn the Queen of Beater's interest. Hermione looked at Harry and sighed. At least Hufflepuffs can do Hogsmeade weekends without getting weird about it, she said, taking Harry's arm matter-of-factly. Harry nodded. Then the two of them froze as they saw Neville greet Susan Bones, who had been waiting for him outside the Hogwarts gate. Neville walked towards her and bent down to the ground before her. A white daisy with a Hufflepuff gold center grew from the ground. He plucked it and placed it shyly in Susan's hair. She reached out and gave him a hug, and as she did, the daisy stem grew through her hair, sprouting other blossoms until she bore a living crown of daisies. "Well, that's just not fair, is it?" Harry said, watching Neville be, "Well, Neville." Hermione nodded. "To be fair, he is widely acknowledged as the best snuggler in all of Hufflepuff, and turns into an actual plushie. Turning into the softest, cuddliest badger in history is hard to beat in Hufflepuff." Harry shook his head. "No, it's just his Neville-illness. If he turned into a porcupine, at least half the girls would cuddle him anyway." Hermione grinned. "Good thing he hasn't got an ounce of Sirius in his nature, or which kind would be defenseless." In Hogsmeade, Narcissa, Black held up a collar of flashing gold bearing the name Sir Humpsalot, attached to an improbably heavy leash chain of gold set with precious stones. Sirius Black looked at them in horror. "You can't expect me to wear that. It's humiliating. I am the Lord of House Black, Merlin Dammit Sissy, and you come and go at my command." Narcissa Black smiled and fluttered her lashes. "Yes, yes. Does my lord and master need walkies? Does the great and powerful lord of the unconquered House Black perhaps wish to see his godson in his first Hogsmeade weekend, or would he like to see how that whole kiss on sight, order and 100 Dementors circling over Hogsmeade react to you strolling in dressed in human form?" Narcissa smiled. Sirius snarled. He kept himself from physically shaking with effort. A decade as food in Azkaban left marks on his soul the ritual hadn't fully healed. He wouldn't break into a panic attack. He had gotten that much back, but the memories remained a bitter poison in his mind. "You could have at least called me Padfoot." Sirius grumped. Narcissa smiled innocently. "But what if Severus knew that name? You know, he hates you more than he hates Longbottom for breaking your record for blowing up cauldrons in class. I am only thinking of your safety." Sirius sighed, then shifted into the form of a great black grim, a dog larger than an Irish wolfhound and far more muscular. The black of its fur seemed to cause light to fade around it, and its eyes had the power to inspire fear into whoever met them. Narcissa snapped the collar around her cousin's neck. "Besides, dear cousin, from what I had to listen to after every Hogsmeade weekend from the girls in Slytherin, and from what I can tell, every other house, you practically copyrighted the name Sir Humpsalot in Hogsmeade. You should be happy enough to wear it again officially." Cyrus, now in his Padfoot form, looked up at Narcissa and whined. She connected the leash, and the two of them went strolling into Hogsmeade to meet the children. This was Draco's first date at Hogsmeade. She hoped he spent it honestly trying to experience being just Draco and not strutting around as a pretend lord as Lucius had in their first Hogsmeade date. She had felt jealous of the girls Lucius seduced, because he at least tried to be Lucius with them, not the little Lord Malfoy performance she always got. Not that anyone would be getting anything from Lucius, since she cursed his bits off. When a black wife cut ties with her ex-husband, she cuts them right off. Harry and Hermione date. Hermione looked at Harry warily. The goblin boy hadn't seemed perturbed by being outperformed in overt romanticism by the rest of their cohort. "So, Harry, what sort of date have you got planned for us? Honeydukes or Fortescues for something sweet? Or are you going to dare the lace of Madame Twining's tea emporium?" Hermione asked, willing to humor a Harry Potter attempt at romance. "I mean, goblins were good at greed and violence, not really renowned for romance." Harry puffed out his chest, which, granted for a trained beater going through puberty in a properly fitted dress shirt, did show off some decent muscles for a wizard. "Flourish and blots. They are having an invite-only rare book sale for tomes from an estate sale from Lestrange Manor. obscure and possibly even forbidden texts of magics not known, or at least not available to any outside, the most ancient and dark families are for sale. Cash only, of course, but I happen to have Mom send me my vault-linked money pouch by Hedwig, so I could probably buy the store itself and not notice. Hermione Jean Granger squealed like Pansy Parkinson, set loose in a clothing store with a gift card. Her eyes lit up like a dragon set loose in the Gringotts Central Gold Reserve, and her claws dug into his arm like they might draw blood. Harry smirked. Goblins knew greed. Why is it witches and wizards both thought that meant only gold? The way to a book witch's heart was through rare and forbidden tomes. Sure, he might have to put down the occasional summoned demon or released Ginny, but he was sure if he played his cards right, she would be snogging his socks off before he used his wind charms to get the dust carefully off books no sane person would touch. Lucius Malfoy decided to make Sirius first kill in front of the rented security wizards at the Flourish and Blots auction. Nothing like professional guards as witnesses, and the crowd at Flourish and Blots contained enough pure-blood members of powerful families to be impossible for the ministry to ignore. Stepping out behind Harry and Hermione as they passed, he struck a pose and gave his best villainous laugh, loving how much more intimidating it sounded coming from Sirius' thuggish chest. "You dare pollute my godson with your filthy mudblood hands, witch. I am Sirius Black, the right hand of Voldemort himself. I will wash him clean in your blood." Lucius watched as 4 guards and 1 witch from the crowd drew their wands and turned on him. He gloried in the shouts of Sirius Black. He heard, knowing his polyjuice was no illusion, and any attempts at disillusionment or enchantment breaking would fail, because he was wearing the actual flesh of Sirius Black, 1979 at least. Lucius snapped out his flame whip without incantation, the only way the Dark Lord taught it, and watched it track to strike Hermione about the throat as she turned. With a mad grin on his face, he waited to watch the mudblood's head fly off, to see Harry Potter's face awash in the life-blood of his first date. "Seriously, you are using fire whip on me. The real Sirius would know way better than that," Hermione said, not bothering to draw her wand, simply tapping her foot in mild irritation. "I am Sirius Black in Flammery," Lucius snarled, this time casting his most powerful fire spell. If he couldn't cut her in half, he would burn the flesh off her bones and leave Harry remembering her death screams as his first date memory. Oddly, she didn't scream. Worse, Harry didn't rush to defend her. "Are you even old enough to shave? I mean, you barely look older than I am." Sirius Black is pushing 40 on a short stick, just out of doing a decade in Azkaban. His hair is thinning and grey. He hasn't got enough muscle on him to keep his ribs off display. I mean, Azkaban is not a health spa. It's literally wizarding prison hell. "How can I take you seriously?" Harry demanded. Worse, the witch in the middle of the firestorm didn't scream, she talked. "Harry, this clearly isn't serious, and I am really excited about the auction. Can we just leave this weirdo to security?" Hermione asked, stepping out of the flames, seemingly unharmed. Petrificus Totalus, Stupefy, Incarcerus, 2 security wizards, and Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE who was going to a book sale on her day off volleyed spells at the so-called Sirius Black. Lucius disappeared into the black smoke of the Death Eater transport spell to avoid the attacks and fled. His mission failed. Amelia Bones watched as Harry Potter and his date entered the auction at Flourish and Blots and tapped her lips with her wand. She knew Sirius Black. She had served with him during the war, and even then, he didn't look that young. She saw the wizard photos of his Azkaban pictures. Sirius Black today was the wreckage of that man in her memory. Azkaban was most definitely not a health spa. Her monocle showed that the so-called Sirius Black was not under any illusion, but at the same time, he looked at best 18. Sirius Black was 33 years old, with the last 10 at Azkaban making him look closer to 50 than 20. Was someone using an old sample of Sirius for Polyjuice, or a metamorph magus using an old photo of Sirius to imitate? Whoever they were, Lord Sirius Orion Black was not the correct answer. Oh well, the auction was starting. Work could wait until Monday. There were books to be had. Madame Twining's Tea Emporium. Hogsmeade Neville Longbottom held out the gilded chair for Susan Bones in a display of old-fashioned manners that would have looked out of place at any other student-frequented facility than Madame Twining's. In the forest of lace doilies, fine tea sets, and overdone Victorian and Edwardian twee that looked like it robbed every period romance drama from the last century of its sets and decoration. It fit right in. Several tables of witches without dates who came to Madame Twining's tea emporium to discuss romance dramas and novels watched the cute young couple engaging in the formal dance of courtship with the seriousness and sincerity possible only by those with absolutely no experience with romance, but a small but seriously intensive lifetime devouring romantic poetry and fiction. The two of them had eye only for each other as they lived out a scene that would have fit seamlessly into Pride and Prejudice, or any of the doomed aristocratic love saga set during the French Revolution. It was safe to say that every witch and the two gay wizards enjoying their own date had all quietly repositioned their chairs so they could take in Neville Longbottom and Susan Bones' first date as the true period romantic drama that it was. Pure in the way that only those with no real-world experience could appreciate romance as a spiritual art, rather than the sweaty hormonal business that would later corrupt it. When Lucius Malfoy decided Sirius Black would have to start his killing spree with the Longbottom brat and Amelia Bones' own niece, it was for the best strategic reasons. He needed Amelia not to think, to react emotionally, and accept Sirius Black's guilt. Lucius knew that last war killed all of the Bones family except Amelia and her niece Susan. Killing Susan would break Amelia, and she would accept Sirius was not only guilty, but must die before given the chance to defend himself. Strategically, it was a good plan. Tactically, ambushing the two cutest beings on the planet, enjoying a first date that was so perfectly approaching the romantic ideal that an entire overpriced tea shop devoted to commercializing the myth of romance was about as wise as attempting to sacrifice a cat to Cthulhu in the middle of a Cat Witches of the World convention. Lucius stormed through the door, which chimed with a cute bell, followed by the twittering of birds in a way that annoyed Lucius as being entirely trying to hard it cute. I am Sirius Black, and I am here to kill you for your aunt's imprisoning me so many years ago. I will bring your head to the Dark Lord as an offering and take again my place at his right hand. Lucius said, knowing the degree of extra in the tea shop was affecting his sense of drama, but being a former theatre major, failing to resist the urge. Neville Longbottom raised his chin and shouted back. Sirius Black was a true romantic. He would never stand in the way of true love. You are an impostor. Lucius was really getting sick of these blood Hufflepuffs. Honestly, who talks about romance when they are being murdered? This time his flame whip lanced out like it was supposed to and wrapped itself around a desperate last-minute shield as Neville Longbottom's beta reflexes allowed him time to scream out a desperate Pratigo. Lucius was really getting annoyed about being blocked. I mean, at least this girl didn't ignore his flame whip altogether, but what was a third year doing having a Pratigo strong enough to resist him? Lucius was a Merlin-be-damned charms master. A master. Not just an owl or newt graduate, he pursued an actual mastery of charms. How is a student blocking him? It wasn't enough Narcissa cut his balls off. Now he was feeling metaphorically emasculated by school children. Oh, no more Mr. Nice Wizard. Lucius was a charms master. He knew all about what could and could not be blocked. There was no room to dodge, and no way to block an unforgivable. Longbottom had lost his parents to the Cruciatus curse, using pain to literally break his parents, while the Lestranges and Barty Crouch Jr. tried to torture the truth of what happened to Voldemort out of them. How will the brat react when his date lies broken and screaming before him? Lucius put all his hatred, rage, and humiliation into the most powerful Crucio he could cast, and the beam of scarlet malice was a spear made to shatter wills, bodies, and lives. It could not be blocked, and there was no room to dodge. The bolt shot at Susan Bones like some twisted mockery of Cupid's arrows, as pictured in the paintings of Madame Twining's tea house. Neville Longbottom yanked Susan Bones behind him and thrust himself forward into the path of the beam. The curse that had broken his parents hit his chest, punching right into his heart. His jaw clenched, but he did not cry out. His body fell to the floor, arching in painful spasm as the strong and trained muscles of his body attempted to rip themselves apart, as nerves fired endlessly in signals of pain far beyond any damage a human body could survive. Neville writhed in pain, but his face was a snarling mask of a badger with his teeth in its prey and unwilling to let go. Neville! Susan Bones cried out, fumbling for her wand and aiming at Lucius. She cast a knockback jinx at him with all her force, but as a charm's master, his protego sloughed it off easily. He struck a pose and prepared his villain speech, intending to monologue before killing the girl, leaving a broken Longbottom to remember being helpless to defend her and forever ready to hunt Sirius Black down for revenge. It was a decent plan, were it not for the fact that a room full of die-hard romantics had just watched the epitome of young love act out the finest romantic tragedy in front of them. Now each one of those witches and wizards were given the option to strike a blow for love, and neither the wards nor walls of Madame Twining's tea-house were up to stopping it. Sadie for Lucius, even Voldemort at his best would have struggled to stand against the spellfire that tore his finest shields to bits and blasted him through the front wall, missing the softer door by about a foot. He transformed to smoke halfway through, thus avoiding the impaling silver spears, stone balls, and one fist made of living flame that tried to blot him from existence. It took 20 minutes for him to cast enough healing spells to be able to make a final attempt at getting Sirius his public murder, and at the very least, recover Lucius' heir for reprogramming. That 20 minutes saw Susan Bones stroking Neville Longbottom's hair and mopping his manly brow as he used her lap as a pillow, and scores of romance-fanatic witch and wizards inscribed the events of this little school-age romance drama into what would be the leading story in Witch Weekly in the next week. Outside, the cries of the witches and wizards for the Dementors to come and kiss that monster Sirius Black grew louder and louder. Interlude. Longbottom Manor, days later. To say Longbottom Manor and its great Lady Augusta was surprised at the veritable clout of owls descending on her was putting it mildly. Hundreds of letters from witches from Neville's age to beyond Lady Augusta's pouring out their admiration, adoration, and some rather frankly stated descriptions of affections and attendant actions, no less than 4 offers of marriage, was almost more than Lady Augusta could take. Her Neville was a sex symbol, or at least romantic idol. Neville, Lady Augusta switched from tea to whiskey before the last owl came in from Amelia Bones, suggesting a meeting between the heads of House Bones and House Longbottom on matters pertaining to the growing closeness of their heirs. Augusta choked on her whiskey. Her Frank had been the ideal son, the picture of everything a mother could hope for, brave, bold, and manly in every way a witch could want. Still, it was Neville that ignited a firestorm of witchly affection across the face of Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and from one of the letters, Sweden. It was possible she was getting too old for this. The sharks were a bit much for a witch of her years. I mean, she had a release form here for Witch Weekly wanting to use his picture for their next cover. Neville. Her little timid Neville. What had she missed? All those years she couldn't see him lost in the shadow of his famous and fallen father. 3 Broomsticks Pub, Hogsmeade Weekend, Narcissa Black, the great black grim known as Sir Humpsalot, Millicent Bulstrode, and a pair of matching Weasleys sat behind a table in the private room of the 3 Broomsticks watching young Draco Malfoy and Luna Lovegood enjoy their first official date at Hogsmeade. Fred finally nerved himself up enough to speak. "Don't you think spying," Fred began, "on your son's first date," continued George, "is a little creepy?" They concluded in stereo. Narcissa sniffed. "Gryffindors. You can't really educate them, although it seems you are at least house-breaking these ones," Narcissa said, giving a mildly approving nod to Millicent. "Listen, boys. I love my son Draco, and I used to know him. Recently, I am seeing signs that I may not know this new Draco, and that beyond loving my son, there may be actual grounds to both like him, and dare I say, be proud of him." Narcissa smiled. "There are 7 of you little ginger beasts running around at last count. I am willing to bet that enough time has passed since the first of you left home that whoever they think they meet when they see you is somewhere beyond a memory and a fantasy, far from a fact. I would hazard what you think you know about your younger siblings is at least as wrong." Narcissa's face went cold. "Lived hang on the decisions we make about our family. I cannot afford to be wrong. Slytherin cunning isn't about plotting, no matter what my dear Lucius liked to think. It is about learning things you don't know, and working even harder to find out the things you used to know that are no longer true. Draco was being a perfect gentleman to a bemused little blonde with radishes hanging off her ears instead of jewelry. She had her wand tucked behind one ear, but she stared at Draco dreamily. Honestly, Narcissa didn't know what to make of the girl. She was either a seer or a madwoman. The Zabini woman was a seer, and probably serial killer, so it was possible to be both. Draco had missed a bit of icing that stuck to his nose. Narcissa frowned. She trained him better than that. Luna leaned forward and kissed it off his nose, ending with a flirty lick. Narcissa hissed. This was not done. The two ginger idiots were applauding madly, and even the Bulstrode girl was nodding as Draco blushed, and the two of them just stared deeply into each other's eyes. It was like something out of those romance novels that so many witches obsessed over. How common. Narcissa sighed. Fine. This was not the Draco she had trained, nor was it a little imitation Lucius, ready to toady to the Dark Lord and his father, shaming his black blood with every breath, but honestly just about living down to the Malfoy name. Malfoy does mean bad faith after all. He may have gone a touch. Narcissa shuddered to think it, Hufflepuff. But being in touch with his actual feelings may have brought out the dragon that slept in his blood, rather than the toady his father had cultivated. Lucius Malfoy, in the guise of Sirius Black, watched, through the pub window, as his son and heir conducted a ridiculous display of public affection like some Hufflepuff in love, or some Gryffindor in mating season, with a Lovegood of all things. Sure, technically they were pure bloods, and they were not Weasley poor by any means, but they didn't care about their social position or their money. They were middle class and okay with that. Honestly, if there was anything that drove a Slytherin insane, it was middle-class complacency. Rule or die, sacrifice everything for the tiniest advance, lie, cheat, and kill for even the smallest promotion. This was the way. There was no such thing as enough. No son of his was being corrupted like that. Not while a little murder and public framing of Sirius Black could put Draco back on the slithery and narrow path of treachery. Lucius bust through the doors and blasted the table between Draco and Luna with a shouted reducto. Draco showed a seeker's reflexes as he dodged. Luna simply waved and pulled her wand out from behind her ear. I am Sirius Black, and I won't let a blood traitor Lovegood pollute a line that bears even a touch of the sacred black blood. Lucius said, striking a dramatic pose and beginning to chant. Avada Cad was as far as he got before Luna pointed her wand and shouted, Ridiculous! The spell called upon the power of the unreal to turn terror into laughter, fear into frivolity. On paper, it should not work on real targets. The use of Polyjuice Potion blended the unreal into the very flesh of Lucius Malfoy as he drew chaos into himself to bear the flesh of another. The runes woven into Luna Lovegood sparkled, and the cup-shaped rune Perthro, the rune of chaos, shone with rainbow light. The rainbow shot from Luna's wand and yanked down the too tight trousers of Lucius Malfoy or Sirius Black, depending on if you counted soul or flesh. Draco Malfoy was a trained duelist, and as he spun out of his seat from the redacto, he had covered his eyes from the splinters even as he drew his wand. The first casting of Expelliarmus was reflexive. Its interaction with Ridiculous was unexpected. With his trousers around his knees, Lucius as Sirius discovered leather pants around your knees make dodging impossible. The disarm spell hit him while he still sparkled in the rainbow magic of Ridiculous. He gripped his wand with both hands, determined to hold it. For this reason, he missed the ripping of his underwear and the cucumber and avocado pear that soared through the air to be caught by Luna Lovegood. Pretty people vegetables. Luna cried happily, waving the anatomically suggestive cucumber and dangling avocado pear above her head in triumph. Lucius shrieked as his junkless state was revealed to the world. Virtually simultaneously, a number of things happened. Lucius Malfoy's dignity died, his ego suffered a crippling blow, and his focus on the current strategic objectives suffered. The waitress who had ducked for cover under the table found herself facing the naked and rather less than rumored impressive crotch of the renegade Sirius Black. She shouted without thought, Sirius Black is wandless. Lord Black has neither twig nor berries, she shrieked. Carlin Creevy, who could not bear to be without his camera, showed the reflexes of a future reporter, probably not a long-lived one, as he brought his magical camera to bear. Draco Malfoy, desperate to get his training to work in a real-life or death fight, tried his spell again. Expelliarmus! Draco shouted, hearing Sirius Black cry out as his wand leapt from his hand to slap into Draco's. Meanwhile, in the back room, the real Sirius Black transformed back into a man, still with the golden Sir Humpsalot collar on, and was being restrained by a frantic Millicent Bulstrode and two Weasley twins as he tried to simultaneously charge the door and undo his own leather breeches. Narcissa cast her best muffling charms, feeling a serious Gryffindor headache coming on. Sirius Black has a wand, and the biggest pair of plums you will ever see. Sirius screamed as he tried to leave the warded and secret room and get himself arrested alongside the impostor, just to prove his junk was both real and respectable. In the three broomsticks, Lucius saw the flash of a Kmar go off, and his quick wandless Pratigo failed to protect his dignity from a picture showing his disarmament in both senses of the word. Draco Malfoy looked at the familiar wand in his hand. This was his father's wand. He looked at a very young and fit Sirius Black, a Sirius Black who seemed to have been gelded. Draco Malfoy's blood began to boil. Sirius looked old, like older than father old. He had grey hairs and wrinkles, but he had seen the man change. He had junk, more than he should, and even in his dog form it was a little hard to ignore. Father, on the other hand, had been gelded by mother when she tried to widow herself, and settled for divorce at Wand Point. Lucius Malfoy had just tried to murder Draco's first date. He admitted the Hufflepuff Hermione's insistence that each of them wear a potions belt was a little paranoid, but a hidden advantage wasn't something a Slytherin would ever turn down. When Harry Potter offered a vial of Thief's Downfall, the fact it was a goblin potion no wizard could buy was enough to make his Slytherin avarice demand he accept it. You couldn't buy it, beg it, or blackmail your way to having it. It was goblin exclusive, and Draco could just casually pat his belt and know it was there. Of such things are Slytherin smiles born. Draco never dreamed he would actually use it. He drew the vial and threw it at the so-called Sirius Black and watched the vial shatter on the Pratigo shield. Thief's Downfall potion spattered Lucius Malfoy, and the Gringotts potion designed to strip away glamours, Polyjuice transformations, and even interrupt Imperius ripped through Lucius Malfoy. Pants around his knees, his junkless state for all to see, Lucius Malfoy in his full bland aristocratic greatness was displayed for the three broomsticks. Draco Malfoy realized his father had attacked him, and Draco had defeated him in magic. He, the heir of Malfoy, had been challenged, in fact, if not in intent, by Lord Malfoy, and Lord Malfoy had lost. Draco held up his father's wand and shouted at him, "Father, you have dared to raise a wand against me in open combat. You have striven to murder my date, and you have exposed yourself in public. You are not fit to lead the House of Malfoy. By manifest right of conquest, I claim the lordship." Draco shouted. He brought the two wands, his own and his father's, together, his own on top, and Lucius gave a strangled cry as magic heard Draco's challenge and deemed it just. The family magic of the Malfoys was cold and opportunistic. It hated failure and loved success. It desired power and greatness. It flared into life, and Lucius' hand flashed forward as the House Malfoy Lord's ring soared through the air towards Draco. Carlin Creevy's camera flashed again. The picture of Draco Malfoy looking regal and cold. The two wands crossed in his hands as he spoke the words of judgment clashed with Lucius Malfoy, Lord of the Wizargamot, head of the Hogwarts Board of Governors with his pants around his ankles, his gelded state on display, and his lord's ring immortalized sailing gently from his hand to his son's. In the three broomsticks, Lucius Malfoy, no longer lord of anything, was wrestled to the ground and bound for auras by two waitresses and a Ravenclaw prefect who didn't like his own date being interrupted either. In the back room, Millicent restored to summoning her beater bat and clobbering Lord Sirius Orion Black, who had gotten one hand free and his belt undone. "Keep your pants on, you furry pervert. There are minors present," Millicent roared. "Plus, Lucius just got arrested for impersonating you. If you rush out there, you will get arrested too, and he might be able to bribe enough people to think you a bad guy in whatever other nonsense he has been up to while polyjuiced," Millicent said, punctuating each point with another blow to the head. "Give it a rest, woman. You're going to kill me if you keep this up." Sirius shouted, ducking from the blows and stopping trying to reveal his manhood to a disbelieving public. "Pants on, pervert, and sit down," Millicent said coldly, and Sirius obeyed. He eyed the two Gryffindor beaters with sullen anger. "Honestly, two good Gryffindor boys like you, honest Weasleys, how can you put up with this?" Serious self-preservation kicked in, or his linguistic skills failed him as he failed to come up with a descriptor for Millicent Bulstrode. Fred smiled happily. Public nudity, George beamed, chains, canings. Then together, all on the first date. They high-fived, and Millicent began to pound her head slowly into the table. "I feel a Gryffindor headache coming on. How do you treat those?" Millicent said, turning her pleading eyes on Narcissa Black, a Slytherin alumni and serious cousin. Without a word, Narcissa poured the underage girl 3 fingers of whiskey and slid it across. They clinked glasses, sipped their whiskey, and observed the goings on outside. Flourish and Blott's auction house, the aftermath. Since reports of serious black activity all over Hogsmeade had been flooding Aura stations, teams with Dementors had been searching frantically. Too many Dementors too far from their controlling agents had the expected results. The Dementors broke free of control. They could feel Harry Potter, a target their collective consciousness had been given in the past by Lucius Malfoy, a target that had caused them actual suffering. They gathered, howling in rage and hunger, and descended on Hogsmeade. Harry and Hermione were coming out of the auction, both pleased with their purchases. Nothing happier than a bookworm with fresh books, or a goblin with an acquisition at far below appraised value, when the Dementors spotted them. Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE, felt the Dementors before she saw them. With the reactions of a veteran, she had her wand up and her patroness flared to life. The silver grim charged the dozens of Dementors who were swarming, and 2 of them fled at its coming. She swore. "Survived the war, died on my day off without even getting to read to book I bought." Amelia thought that was Bones' luck for you, consistent and always bad. Just then, the gathering dark caused by the Dementors was hurled back as a phoenix burst from the wand of young Hermione Granger. The phoenix was so bright it was hard to look at, and a dozen Dementors fled as the phoenix patroness took to the sky. Amelia had to avert her eyes from the phoenix, so bright was its flaming silver form, so she was looking right at Harry Potter. "No more. I have let these things terrify and harass my people for too long. No more. Do you hear me, vermin?" The sky split with lightning as bolts of jagged lightning ripped through the dark sky and flayed the Dementors, even as the wind began to howl and swirl as a cyclone formed out of nowhere. Harry's Soilo rune, the jagged lightning bolt scar in his forehead, blazed in the reflected lightning, and the goblin silver of it seemed to catch flame. Expecto Patronum, Harry Potter, the boy who lived, was supposed to be the savior of wizarding Britain. Dumbledore promised that under his guidance, the boy would somehow destroy he who must not be named. Amelia Bones had put no trust in that, nor the rumored prophecy everyone whispered of, but no one knew the details of. This day, she believed. From Harry's wand, a basilisk extended. It grew to an easy 70 feet and swam through the air like it was water. "Kill them, rend them, flay them, tear them from my sky." Harry hissed, and power poured from his wand in a never-ending stream, twisting and curling like a living serpent as the basilisk grew another 60 feet until it dominated the sky. The eyes of the basilisk patroness opened, and a golden light blasted from those eyes like the blast wave of collapsing wards on a Gringotts vault or government super-secure facility. A muggle might wonder if a nuclear weapon had been used. Where the light struck the Dementors, they fell from the sky. Dozens of them fell, and the rest broke to flee. The basilisk hissed its fury and gave chase, the flaming silver phoenix diving in to rake with burning claws again and again, each strike causing another Dementor to fall from the sky. Amelia Bones jumped as a Dementor hit the ground beside her, unmoving. Dementors were less than half physical. The idea of a Dementor's body landing on the ground beside her was impossible to process. They were almost unkillable. That is why the Ministry made a devil's bargain with them all those years ago. They would never be able to fight the Dementors of Azkaban without losing most of the Aura Corps at the time. That was when the Aura Corps had been strong, well-trained, and vital, not the sick-joke post-war budget cuts and constant Malfoy-led accommodations had turned her Aura Corps into. She used her own patroness to summon the ready reaction force from headquarters. Then she sent another for Alastor Moody. Sure, Mad Eye wasn't what you would call reasonable and should never be allowed around the press, but there was nothing about facing dark creatures or magic he didn't know, even if he shouldn't. Hours later, DMLE inspection of the Dementor attack. "This is dark magic, Amelia," said Dumbledore. "There is no living creature, not even a basilisk, that can petrify a Dementor." Mad Eye was poking one with his battle staff and laughing happily. "Bollocks, Dumbledore. No phoenix can kill them, unicorns can kill them, Kyrin can kill them. The fact that dragons kill them is why there is a government-sponsored sanctuary that eats half the magical creature department budget that just so happens to be at the closest point of contact between the Hebrides Islands and Azkaban." Dumbledore looked down his nose at Mad Eye Moody. "The phoenix is a creature of light, as is the unicorn. Their touch is destruction for something that is made of darkness, hatred, and hunger." Moody nodded. "And the dragon is just magic's answer to kill them all, and let's see what grows back next cycle. They are wild Albus, not dark, not light. They are wild magic's answer to anything witches or wizards get stupid enough to create and not be able to stop." Dumbledore frowned, knowing the text Alastor got that from, and remembering he had it banned and he swore, burned to the last copy. The people had to turn to the light for hope against the darkness, not the untamed power of wild magic. The dark was too tempting, its gifts were too sweet and poison. People needed to know only the light could save them. "Alastor, my old friend, this was no dragon. This was a basilisk, a creature of the dark, of evil," Dumbledore said in his best grandfatherly voice. "Up your arse, Dumbledore. I have my newt in magical creatures, and you didn't even owl in them. A basilisk is a great, bloody, magical snake. It isn't dark, it isn't light, it is freaking dangerous, but gets hungry only every few years, so is honestly less likely to kill you than drinking and apparating, or telling Augusta Longbottom what you think of her hat." Moody made a very rude gesture with his fingers in case Dumbledore was unclear what Moody had meant by the hole-up-the-spout quip, grinning as Dumbledore's grandfatherly smile died, and the old man flicked his wand out. Amelia Bones intervened before her two experts could start shooting at each other. "Whatever opinions you may have about Basilisk, or Phoenix for that matter, these were no more creatures than my own Grim is. They were Patronus. Patronus are symbols of hope, of trust, of joy, are pure expressions of abstract love for magic and the world. They are not creatures. They do not get the powers of the thing whose shape they mimic. They are just a blob of spiritual power, a bit of esoteric magic powered by joy and love that drives back the dark. They don't petrify unreal demons of despair." Amelia objected firmly. Alastor poked the petrified Dementor, then kicked it with his fake leg. "This one did. Ruddy love to know if he can teach that." Mad Eye chuckled again, leaning on his staff, letting the defensive runes on it blaze in silent warning that Dumbledore's earlier challenge had not been forgotten. Dumbledore shook his head. "We cannot tell the people that a dark creature saved them from the Dementors." Amelia finally snapped at her old teacher and chief warlock of the Wizigamot. "We don't have to tell them anything, Albus. They bloody saw it. I am, for once, just going to report the truth. The boy who lived summoned his patroness and drove off the better part of 100 Dementors who were running wild and attacking Hogsmeade." As Albus began to object, she held up her hand and stopped him. "I will tell you what I told Minister Fudge. I will lie under orders about what the public does not need to know, like the petrified Dementors. I disagree, but I will obey. I will not try to tell the people of Hogsmeade that the Dementors didn't attack them, and a great sparkly basilisk patroness saved us all. They saw, and they are already sharing pictures of it. I will lie if I have to, but I will not make a fool out of myself telling people in a rainstorm that it's a sunny day. At some point, I have a duty to the DMLE to keep some scraps of credibility." Dumbledore sighed. She was right. It was too late. Things were slipping farther and farther from his control. DMLE Headquarters, Ministry of Magic. "Here is your wand, Lucius. I don't know how you thought that was going to go, But from where I am looking, you had best run, because your name, your money, and even your title aren't worth a muggle's chances in Azkaban." Walden McNair said, standing over the body of the aura he had just cut down. "You had best run back to the Dark Lord and beg his forgiveness. Your position was what made you valuable to his return, nothing else. Now you don't even have that. Take your lumps, scream for a little while, beg at his feet until he gets bored, and he might raise you up again." McNair advised, unaware how far the Dark Lord had fallen at the moment. Lucius snarled, "I will not. I haven't lost yet. I do not need the Dark Lord to beat a group of teenage brats not even past their owls." McNair shrugged, checking he got the nick out of his executioner's axe. "Well, so far it's brats many, Death Eaters nil, so you had best correct that before you face the Dark Lord, and he asks why people are laughing at his chosen acolytes." Walden McNair walked to the ministry, flew, and departed. Lucius followed, before word of his escape could force the ministry to lock down the building. There would be another day. 39. Chapter 39, Noodle and Neville Show. Secrets of Snake Sex Cult at Hogwarts revealed. Rita Skeeter reveals shocking truth. The headlines of the Daily Prophet were always sensational. While the Ministry of Magic wielded its control over the free press, with the subtlety of a beater's bat at a pickup game, the paper itself remained the single most popular news source, because it not only gave the best news coverage over every varied field of interest in the magical world, it provided more gossip than a coven of former school witches 3 bottles of wine into catching up. Rita Skeeter was a cynic. She had been used more often than not to create heroes for the ministry, or from ancient and noble houses that were trying to create some sensation over some useless sprog they were launching into politics. The one thing shared between all of those heroes is that they had feet of clay, unless it was some other dark brown substance you could also step in. When young Neville Longbottom became the darling of Witch Weekly overnight, and a tiny bit of digging linked him to some improbable stories coming out of Hogwarts, she could smell a put-up job. Linked to the boy who lived, son of hero parents, but whispers of darkest murder in the ministry. All off the record, of course, but the whispers were in too many ears not to have some official truth to them. Rumors of him and any number of girls from Hufflepuff were obviously fake. I mean, Rita had been at Hogwarts. First-year girls thought romance was holding hands in the hallways and eating together in the Great Hall. Besides, Neville Longbottom's reputation in the Longbottom family was timid, fat little squib. Rita looked at his photos from the Hufflepuff Post, an in-house quarterly magazine put out by current Puffs for Puff alumni about their Quidditch team, and had to admit the boy had filled all the way out, and a shy, soft smile attached to a slab of young, but clearly developing, nicely beef was not hard to sell as a teen girl romance target. Obviously, this was either Longbottom House tossing ridiculous amounts of gold to create a stir to launch Neville as some sort of celebrity as part of that house's reclaiming of its former place, or a ministry-backed cover-up, a shiny distraction to cover facts that could not bear scrutiny. Rita Skeeter had done what any good reporter did before picking an angle. She spied on people who had every reason to think they were alone. Honestly, when she found out her animagus form was a bug, she had cried for days. She wanted a unicorn, an otter or wolf, something beautiful, majestic, or at least able to defend itself. She got a bug, not a wasp to be harmful or a butterfly to be beautiful. She got a stag beetle, not a fast flyer, not dangerous. Still, when she had been trapped her third transformation as a literal bug on the wall in the Ravenclaw girls' bathroom, she had overheard what her friends really thought of her. While she was processing the emotional trauma of that, and the death of what few illusions she retained, she then heard them admitting to improper relations with the Dada instructor, Professor Drump. It was her first expose, and showed her the truth. Being a bug animagus is the ultimate weapon for seeking out the truth. She had been spying and blackmailing in sequence to both advance her career and ensure her own safety. It had been a winning combination that had never failed her. It didn't fail her this time either. The truth she heard whispered from the girls on the Hogsmeade weekend to their older sisters was fantastic beyond her imagination. Neville Longbottom, the heartthrob defender of love on which Weekly ran a snake cult at Hogwarts. The details didn't seem to make a lot of sense. There was something about groups of traumatized children, and Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter's snake, who they kept calling Noodle for some reason. Supposedly, those children who were previously writing home begging to be removed from Hogwarts went to a few sessions with Neville and Noodle, and were soon writing home babbling about how much they loved Hogwarts and never wanted to leave. The line that kept coming up in some form was always the same. I was so scared, but Noodle looked into me, then Neville talked to me, and I wasn't scared anymore. Rita had heard about snake cults back during the First Blood War, and he who must not be named. He was a Parselmouth, and rumors of him going through the women of pure blood society like a Pied Piper were all the scandal, before their money and magics made criticizing him unhealthy. A few years later, he just went full murder hobo and killed anyone he didn't like, and half the people he did. But for a while, he was a figure of such dark charm every witch spoke his name with a wistful sigh. Snake cults and sects had been a thing since Egypt. Greece and Rome also had their own versions. The magic of the Parselmouths and the strange magics of divination had always been intermingled in strange, disturbing ways that spawned cults that the Muggle rulers at the time and their tame wizards could never fully suppress. Not an English sort of thing, those snake sex cults, but every school girl and boy read all about them. The idea was almost impossible to kill. It fit so well with teenage hormones and a boarding school's total lack of parental supervision or any sort of sane sex education. Rita Skeeter learned in her school days the Hogwarts wards ignored animagi. Given the rumors that the founders were all animagi, it did make a certain amount of sense. Infiltrating the school was relatively easy. She decided to infiltrate the Hufflepuffs first. Most of the rumors started there, and she wanted to find out how the Hufflepuff girls thought of Neville when they knew they were alone. There honestly wasn't anything worth mentioning for 2 whole days. The students were being disgustingly Hufflepuff. They studied, made sure each other were okay, and signed up for projects on the help board the prefects put up for things the house elves couldn't handle or get right. The second night, one of the fifth-year girls started screaming in her bed, and as Rita began moving to the older girls' dormitories, she heard the cry go up. Get Neville and Noodle. This was it. This girl was obviously one of the cult victims. Now she would be able to see the truth. Another Hogwarts hero would be exposed. She could not go after the boy who lived, as Dumbledore and the Ministry both had ways to punish her she could not survive. One of them professionally, and the other one killed Grindelwald, so careers were not the worst consequence. The fifth-year girl was screaming, and her magic was running wild, lashing out with unformed but emotionally supercharged power. Rita moved to a corner where the power would have less chance of accidentally killing her when she saw the most shocking sight. A badger the size of a small bear charged into the room. A dresser that must have weighed several 100 pounds was flying towards the entrance, but with an explosive snarl he slapped it away. The great oaken dresser, its runic arrays, special expansion, and locking charms exploded from the power and intent of that charging badger, as if an origami bird flew into a forge fire. He charged the bed where the witch was screaming, her power out of control, and the witch lunged at the badger with hands clawed and wild eyes. Rita expected to be reporting a murder, when instead what she saw was the badger absorb the fury of the screaming witch, her power and her hands hammering and clawing against him as he simply grumbled and growled intolerant badger until she subsided into hugging and burying her face in his fur. Rita hadn't noticed the snake coming in. That struck her as alarming, as it was almost well over the reported 12 feet, probably at least 14 at this point, black as death and marked with silver glowing runes. How she could not notice the most dangerous snake this side of the rumored school basilisk she did not know. But instead of terrifying the girls it passed, most of them reached out a hand to stroke it and thank it as it passed. The snake coiled up onto the bed and then across the back of the badger until its head was near that of the fifth-year girl. As soon as the snake's eyes met the girl's, she stopped weeping and her body relaxed. Rita was ready. This was it. Snake cult mind control. The badger shifted back into a third-year boy in badger pajamas, because of course he would have badger pajamas. She crawled down the wall slowly to hear the boy speak, wondering what sort of programming or grooming the little pervert was doing, Rita could almost see the scandal exploding. What she got was something different. Were you remembering before with Lockhart? Neville asked softly. I hated him. I hated it. But I can remember wanting it, even following him and wishing to be chosen. The fifth-year girl began, her voice rising. The snake ducked his head in her line of sight and began swaying and hissing. The girl calmed and slowed. Neville held her hands. Look inside, center yourself. Start using what we have taught you. Let your magic rise, let it flow through your body. Don't ask it to do anything, just let it fill you completely and utterly until there is no room for anything else. Feel that magic, know it as yours. That is you. That is yours. Now take it with you and sink into your thoughts, sink into your memories. Anything that is you, that is yours, keep it inside. Anything that feels different, let your magic wrap it up. Let it slide between those thoughts and you. They are not yours, they are not you. The girl shuddered and relaxed. She began to become embarrassed and mopped at her face, then blushed as she realized she was holding hands with a boy in her pajamas in her bed in the girls' dorm, with half a dozen of her fellow puff girls looking on. You must think I'm an idiot. I had straight O's in my defense against the dark arts, and I let myself get taken and brainwashed right in class. How can I ever trust myself? I can't even defend myself. I could never think about being an aura, she said. Neville turned her face to his. The boy looked old without looking mature. A boy who hit ancient without getting to grow up first. You were potioned. Your mind and your magic were fighting so hard to free you. Your mind and your magic never stopped fighting. That is why your memories are such storms of conflicting feelings. You can feel the want was fake, the desire was fake, but it was strong. The potion was so strong the standard detection couldn't even touch it. The standard antidote couldn't even touch it. Hermione, Millicent, Harry, and I together had to come up with something new and stronger just to stop it. Noodle is teaching you to defend your mind. Let your magic partition off the thoughts that were not yours. Then you can talk to me, and we can deal with the feelings and thoughts that are yours. What happened, happened. You survived, but making you forget is just going to leave you broken. You have to work through it, learn to trust yourself, your instincts, and your magic again. I can help, but the work has to be yours, or the strength won't be. Neville said. The girl laughed, a shocking sound that had broken and jagged edges. How did you get so wise? She said, hugging the boy. I let my uncle poison me almost into squibhood and attempt to murder me more than a dozen times without saying anything because deep down I agreed that I would never be the man my father was and everyone would be better off with me dead. Then I met some friends who decided that was stupid and didn't give up on me. Neville said, and the snake lunged forward to butt him in the forehead. Neville grinned at the snake. Rita actually left Hogwarts for her own apartment after that. She looked at the memory in her pensive. Well, it was hers now. I mean, technically it belonged to House Folly, but if they wanted her to keep secret about the fact their ruling lord was now a complete squib due to a completely failed empowerment ritual, they would keep quiet about her having it. There was some legitimacy going on with the snake, which is creepy, and her care of magical creatures was only owl level. But only the famous and possibly only mythical Naga was supposed to be able to do that, not a rock viper. Neville wasn't using any magic at all. She was prepared to believe little Lord Longbottom was a sex pervert. They had one killed and one arrested at Hogwarts just last year, so it fit. Besides, Professor Toland Drump had been fired as the Dada instructor when she was in school for messing with underage girls, so it fit Hogwarts as she knew it. She was prepared to believe little Lord Longbottom was some sort of snake cult leader. That was how Voldemort started, if you believed the Wilder rumors from the First Blood War. Having him in the orbit of the boy who lived made it less a champion of light versus champion of darkness, and more of a clash of rising Dark Lord versus returning Dark Lord if the snake cult Longbottom led was part of Harry Potter's secret plan to take over the world. She was not willing to accept that little Lord Longbottom was a secret badger animagus who gave emergency cuddles in the night and psychomagical counseling to abuse victims. She would refuse to print that as a really obvious cover story if the ministry tried to force her to. She could never, in her cynical heart of hearts, accept it as truth. She followed him into the Hogwarts infirmary, where she found him and that Slytherin girl who murdered her way into the Selwyn Lordship mixing potions for the Mediwitch. Here we go. He must be brewing love potions, or loyalty potions, some sort of mind control thing to support his cult. She crept closer and looked at the book. One cauldron was brewing Skill-Grow bone regrowth potion, and the other was brewing blood restoration potions. Madame Pomfrey was bustling about, bottling and labeling, chatting with the two as she trained them both in various diagnostic charms, as the heir to one ancient and noble house, and ruler of another, somehow wasted their free time learning to be apprentice healers, instead of learning politics and economics, as any rational aristocrat would. The Slytherin beater Marcus Flint was brought in. The boy was in his last year at Hogwarts, and was a renowned thug in his early years. His father had somewhat of a dark reputation, but the family had produced some noted auras and even ahead of the DMLE in the past. He was not in Hogwarts robes, but dress robes, and was writhing in pain, obviously sweating, and with a fake smile plastered on his face as if nothing was wrong. Madame Pomfrey looked up in shock as various wards on her med bay went off as Marcus was brought in on a stretcher. Argus Filch sweated on one end of the stretcher and Harry Potter on the other. The snake slithered behind like an interested tourist taking in the sights. "Argus, what happened?" Madame Pomfrey snapped. "He just portkeyed in, collapsed in the hall, bleeding all over the place. Won't say nothing about how he got cut. The blood, it burns the stone when it falls, so it ain't no natural cut." Argus grunted. While a squib, he had seen enough dark magic to know when something was beyond normally foul. Madame Pomfrey was working her wand in quick diagnostic charms, while Neville and Millicent cut away the dress robes on Marcus' left arm and side. An ugly black line crossed his bicep, then rib. The flesh was slowly rotting under it, digging deeper and deeper into his flesh. "Marcus, this isn't a Quidditch accident, and it isn't even your usual back from holidays beading that you won't admit to. This curse is feeding off you. It is family magic, and I don't know how to counter it." "Do you at least know what it is?" Madame Pomfrey asked. "Don't know what you are talking about. Just got back from lunch with dear old Dad. Told him I plan on joining the Auras. He had plans on me joining his old firm, but I don't care for their health plan, and senior management is bonkers. We agreed to disagree, and then it seemed I slipped buttering a scone and cut myself with a butter knife." Marcus smiled, and his eyes showed the acceptance of death that argues he did indeed know the curse that was used, and there was no point in trying to do anything about it. Millicent Bulstrode looked at Neville and began hissing in that strange serpent tongue. The snake joined in, then the three of them descended on the writhing Flint. Millicent touched the bubbling black wound on his side, and white frost covered it. The snake the girls had called Noodle pinned Marcus with his eyes, and the boy went still. Neville drew his wand, and a sickle of golden light grew from it. With several quick slashes, he carved open Flint's side like he was butchering meat. Millicent followed behind, her wand stopping the pumping blood as Madame Pomfrey exploded into action. Runes burned in the air as she chanted one set of spells verbally, and cast another runically with her wand, in a display of simultaneous sorcery she would have been surprised to see at St. Mungo's, let alone at a school infirmary. The black from the arm had extended towards Marcus' neck, before Millicent and Neville repeated the freeze and cleave on the arm, taking half the meat off his upper arm, leaving only a string of bicep connected. The black had advanced into his core, and Marcus began to thrash. "We are losing him," snarled Madame Pomfrey. Neville took some seeds from his belt and forced them into the wounds. Holding his hand over them, he let his magic roar in a way that caused Rita to freeze in fear as the magic went wild in the air around the hospital bed. The seeds turned into flowers, which sank their roots into the boy's arm and neck. The flowers that grew were dark and disturbing. Each poisoned blossom bloomed and fell to lie hissing and smoking on the stone of the hospital floor as they ate away at the stone. The toxin seemed to be drawn out, as Marcus stopped thrashing, and Madame Pomfrey pointed with her chin at the potions table, and the girl Millicent began to take up the potions, choosing them by half lifting and waiting for Madame Pomfrey's nod to confirm, before she took them to Flint's body and simply opened the cap. Some magic of hers caused the potion to simply flow into Marcus Flint's body, not drinking it or injecting it, just magically diffusing it through whole tissues. A few minutes later, Marcus relaxed and lapsed into sleep. Madame Pomfrey began to clean up, and Neville and Millicent went back to their potions for hospital stores. This wasn't exactly budding Dark Lord material, He who must not be named just executed his badly wounded followers. The weak had no place at his side. Grindelwald used to just abandon his. If they lived, they could return to him. If they died, well, they were useless. No Dark Lord went about healing people who didn't even serve them. As a cult leader, miracles got shouted from the rooftops, not done behind closed doors and not discussed. She followed Neville and Noodle to the greenhouse of Professor Sprout. Sure enough, both girls and boys of various houses snuck into the greenhouse as if worried about being seen. They sat in a circle, with Noodle coiled up in the middle. This was it. This was Neville's secret cult. Now Rita would get her scoop. What followed made Rita wish beetles could be sick. Neville led a discussion about abuse. One by one, the kids would talk about what they had been through here at Hogwarts, and wasn't that a damning little litany for Dumbledore, and at home. Some had even talked about abuse they had committed, Crabbe and Goyle being too struggling to deal with that. Neville took them into the archaeomancy that Dumbledore had fought so hard to remove from Hogwarts. He took them through exercises to allow them to look at those events whose pain twisted them and changed the way they reacted and made decisions. With Noodle, he would isolate those memories, wall them off, and then talk them through examining how that trauma had changed their reactions. Discussed honestly what reactions they thought had worth and what were just more problems. This was it. Rita was waiting for him to offer to take the memories away, to get permission to modify their thoughts and feelings. This was how a cult leader passed off making minions as healing. Instead, Neville let them into his own thoughts, guided them through how he was still processing his own trauma, how he knew that his magic wanted him to be whole and strong, but he couldn't be whole and strong without those memories. Surviving them was important to the Neville he was now, and cutting those away would leave him less than whole and weak when he moved on. You couldn't learn from what you forgot. Bloody Hufflepuffs. He didn't offer them a quick fix. He offered them hard work, a lot of misery, and at the end of it, ownership of themselves and their magic. This wasn't a cult leader. Cult leaders promised if you gave up your will to them, all your problems would go away. He ended the session with giving everyone a very Hufflepuff speech about feelings. Rita was ready to write it off as feel-good fluff when Neville drew out his wand and talked about how he could never really command his good memories when he didn't own up to the truth about the bad ones. For a long time, I lied to myself. I lied to everyone about being abused. I swore everything was fine, and when I tried to cast my Patronus, nothing happened. I thought I was weak and worthless. Then some friends hounded me into admitting the truth and dealing with it. I wasn't pretending everything was okay, but you know what? Some parts of my life were legitimately good. Some people legitimately cared. Magic is powered by your soul, not your lies. It was never a lack of power. I just got so lost in the lies I lost myself. Neville stopped talking, then pointed his wand forward. Expecto Patronum, he said, and a silver badger exploded into existence and capered about the room happily, before putting its nose down and going looking for gnome traces. One by one, the rest of the students took out their wands and did the same. Most only glowed, but Crabbe and Goyle both shot a stream of silver mist out of their wands, and she could see the thick troll-like boys' eyes were shedding tears in the glowing light of their Patronus. Neville smiled at them and gave the two Slytherin thugs a Hufflepuff hug. The rest of the students joined them. Rita looked at this healing circle and the real magical empowerment that was coming out of it, and didn't know what to think. She was busy trying to see Neville's angle when she froze. Two night-black eyes stared into hers from well within striking distance. A strong legilimency probe slashed through her pathetic resistance and read the truth of her entire life, sifted it for bits that interested it. A tongue flicked out of Noodle's mouth to lick Rita Skeeter on the glasses mark by her beetle eyes, then he turned away. He knew and did. Nothing. She followed Neville around for days afterwards. Twice she was caught by Luna Lovegood that simply stuck her on her shirt like a badge and talked non-stop to her about. Well, it was kind of hard to follow. The girl was either mad or a seer. Possibly both. She also clearly knew Rita was an animagus and didn't care. She walked Rita into places Neville was at, or where Neville would be. People came to Neville, and if they were in any sort of serious state, Neville either took them to Noodle or Hermione, and or Harry would drop the snake off shortly for a session. It wasn't a secret from the house heads, as Flitwick, McGonagall, and Sprout all pointed people at Neville. Slytherin seemed to just show up. Skeeter assumed they had some horribly complicated secret Slytherin way, but they did show up. She kept looking for the angle, the trick, the secret hustle. She had been at Hogwarts and believed the stories of a magical school that would keep all the children safe and let them explore the wonders of magic and the whole world it offered. She had learned the truth. Power, privileged, advantage, and the indulging of every vice and appetite that wealth and power provided were the truth of the wizarding world. Worse than muggles, the witches and wizards of the world had access to powers whose abuses muggles couldn't dream of. There were no heroes. Every champion of light shone so bright to hide their crimes, but they always came out in the end. That is when it hit Rita. The truth won't set you free, but it sure makes your word count sore in a hurry. The story practically wrote itself. Daily Prophet lead story. Secrets of snake sex cult at Hogwarts revealed. Rita Skeeter reveals shocking truth. Rumors have been exploding all over the wizarding world about Neville, the Longbottom heir who so recently caused a sensation on the cover of Witch Weekly for his first date heroism. This reporter was not surprised to hear the whispers of something darker, something that Hogwarts had been covering up. You may have heard the whispers about a secret snake sex cult at Hogwarts and the recent rumors of Lord Longbottom being involved. This reporter dares to go where no other does and tells the truth no one wants you to hear. You have been promised your children are safe at Hogwarts, and this is a lie. There is a secret snake cult at Hogwarts, and Neville Longbottom is involved. There have even been abuses that the Hogwarts Charter from the days of the founders have charged the headmaster and heads of houses to protect our vulnerable children against. But these deviant acts have not been caused by the snake cult. They have been stopped by them. This reporter has looked into the rumors of the snake cult and found they are true. There is a snake that has mind powers far beyond anything this reporter has seen in all her years, and the snake is using them alongside Heir Longbottom to help deal with the damage our children have suffered under the neglect, and sometimes abuse, of the predators Hogwarts has allowed to pass as teachers inside its hallowed halls. Why are our children turning to Neville Longbottom when they have the Hogwarts teaching staff and the champion of light himself, Albus Dumbledore, to turn to? This reporter has seen 100 heroes be created by the press, by accident, or by cold political design, and each of these heroes has been revealed to be deeply flawed and frequently dangerous. I expected no less when I dug into the secrets of young Neville Longbottom, but I was not prepared for what I saw. Son of a pair of hero auras, a noted beater and companion of the boy who lived, I expected a budding warrior, a noble politician trained from birth both to wield and to seek power. What I found was a shy boy who had been deeply hurt by those he both loved and trusted in the past, more on that it is not my place to say, nor will I, and found the strength in a very Hufflepuff way, through his friends to work past that hurt and seek healing. We go to Hogwarts to learn magic, and I had been through Hogwarts and thought I knew it. I returned to Hogwarts to learn the truth about Neville Longbottom and his secret snake sex cult. What I learned was the truth about healing and magic. Neville Longbottom isn't a warrior like his sainted father and mother. Neville Longbottom is a healer. Training under Madame Pomfrey in the magical arts of healing, he is also training under Professor Sprout in the ways of soul healing, and under Harry Potter's magical serpent familiar, called Noodle, hardly a Dark Lord name, in mental healing. Are your children safe at Hogwarts? This reporter thinks they are safer now than ever before, but it is due to students helping students, not the world-renowned headmaster and Order of Merlin first-class holder Albus Dumbledore. The secret of the secret snake sex cult at Hogwarts. No sex, just a snake that sees deeply. A young lord whose sorting into Hufflepuff should not have been a surprise, and a deeper understanding of how magic was supposed to make us better. In the years I attended, and probably you too, the promise of Hogwarts was a lie. With this group of Hufflepuffs that rumor had slandered as a snake sex cult, the promise of safety and wonder of Hogwarts may actually come true. 40, Chapter 40 Quidditch, Side of Dragon. Ministry of Magic, Office of Cornelius Fudge. What happened to your close relationship with the Daily Prophet management, Cornelius? Do they not have any respect for your authority as minister? Albus Dumbledore smoothed his beard more or less continuously in what the minister was beginning to realize was a nervous tic. After having to kowtow to the almost omnipotent champion of light, a glorified school teacher who held the top post in the Wizigamot and International Confederation of Warlocks, but could not be bothered to do the work of either body, it was deeply amusing to see the mighty Dumbledore nervous about a group of school children. The Prophet is a newspaper, Albus, and we here in Wizarding Britain have a world-renowned free press, not like the tame lapdogs of the French or Russians who have to clear every comma with 3 censors before they are allowed to print a weather report," said Fudge pompously, embracing the public stance that ignored the ministry's heavy hand on official news sources when its own interests were involved. It isn't as if they acted against any instructions I gave them, nor do I recall any specific conversations about covering up any snake sex cult stories at Hogwarts. It isn't as if it comes up in daily conversations. Cornelius paused, then looked theatrically thoughtful. I mean, it does now, certainly. I have had everyone from the shoeshine hag to the centaur who delivered our milk, the goblin teller at Gringotts, and every single witch and wizard I saw in the coffee shop trying to get my morning tea and scones try to bend my ear about it. What happened to your control over your faculty and students, Dumbledore? Don't they have any respect for your authority as headmaster? Cornelius Fudge slapped his knee and laughed right in the face of Albus Dumbledore, Supreme Warlock of the Wizigamot, Supreme Mugwump of the Iqua, Headmaster of Hogwarts, and Order of Merlin First Class. 10 years of boot-licking washed away as he laughed, and he rather enjoyed the taste better than boot polish. Albus' wand twitched into his hand, and the 4 auras in the room began to sweat. If Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore chose to blast the Minister of Magic into rainbow sparkles or transform him into a toad, he would do so. They would draw their wands, of course. As sworn auras of the defense detail, they had magical oaths binding them too, but none of them expected that would make a difference to the outcome. The magical power in the room cycled around Dumbledore like a vortex. It was all the wizards could do to hold the magic of their own core from flowing into and being absorbed by the champion of light. If they dared to raise a wand against him, they doubted any attack they raised would be noticed, nor any defense they put up help. In the end, the old wizard sighed. Minister Fudge, the actions of these children threaten the control that I wield over internal discipline in Hogwarts, and of my moral authority to direct, guide, and shape the young witches and wizards who we have been shaping to better suit the needs of a peaceful and orderly society. Ancient laws built upon mysticism and paganism, respecting individual power and ties to family above nation, have no place in Wizarding Britain. Magic and the primordial forces that birth it are no fit guides for humanity. We no longer serve magic. Magic serves us. You profit from a Wizarding Britain whose Wizigamot sleeps and stirs only to protect its monetary interests, and those social advantages that distract them from taking up and wielding magical power that has the capacity to reshape the world and upset the delicate balance we must walk. The price we pay for being left alone to tame Wizarding Britain into a well-managed flower garden of decorative but thornless blossoms, rather than a dark and ancient forest filled with eldritch horrors, is humoring the overbred and overprivileged nobility while we get the real work done. Dumbledore turned to the hollow shell of a man that was Cornelius Fudge. A crusader once, he found the need for the gold of Lucius Malfoy had been required to get anything done in a ministry deliberately kept cash-starved, even as he needed the moral authority and political support of Albus Dumbledore to keep Malfoy's dark houses from overturning or ignoring the few laws that limited their behavior. Fudge had been a well-trained puppet for years. Dancing at the call of offsetting masters, he tried to pit against each other to allow him the Illucino of independence. Lucius Malfoy's wealth and power were shattered, and now the moral authority of Dumbledore and his control over the Light faction were being threatened. Minister Fudge thought this was going to make him a free man and the actual master of Wizarding Britain. Fool! A puppet with his strings cut did not dance. It collapsed. Dumbledore would try one last appeal to the fool's self-interest. You need to put controls on these children. I cannot control their actions inside of Hogwarts when they wield the Charter against me. The Charter was made by founders who saw wizards as the servants of magic and the protectors of a magicless humanity. The founders and their charter charged wizards to open themselves to the wild magics of creation, to stand as intercessors between magicless humanity and the world they inhabited but could not understand. When the Statute of Secrecy was enacted, we chose to cut ourselves off from the Muggles and let them wipe out their world in their blindness as long as our kind could live on. Your ministry was created to steer wizarding Britain away from those primal powers, to give them bread and circuses, and leave ancient powers to be forgotten as a dream we outgrew and moved past. Grindelwald tried to wake the wizarding world by force, and in the end, I had to stop him. The Charter will not let me act against the children in Hogwarts for following the rules the founders laid down before wizarding Britain became a legal entity. Harry Potter needs to be guided into being the end of Voldemort, not the rise of the next Grindelwald. Fudge shook his head. You want me to seat them early, call the Wizengamot into session, and risk them trying to bring up Sirius Black before the Dementors have found and kissed him, just so we drag them into wizarding politics where they will have to play by our rules and face power that comes from votes and favors, gold and secrets, not wand and magic. Why should I risk it? Right now it is not my power they are threatening. The Dementors are the Ministry's fist. It is time the ancient and noble houses realize the days of their primacy are gone. They slept too long, power has been in our hands too long. They have no idea how the world actually works now. Few of them could even cook a meal without a dozen house elves, or tie their own shoes, even with a wand and 20 grimoires to guide them. No. Dementors will find and kiss Sirius Black. The ancient and noble houses will see that the Ministry can bring down even one of their own when we need to, and the people of Wizarding Britain will be reminded that only the Ministry can defend them from the dark. I will seat them and give them their orders of Merlin after Sirius Black dies, not before. Cornelius Fudge said, secure in his newfound power. Dumbledore shook his head. He did not need Sybil Trelawney to predict this would all end in tears. Puppets should know their places, both Cornelius Fudge and Harry Potter. Dumbledore would wait. He was the most powerful wizard of light in living memory. When Cornelius lost control of his pet Dementors, as he had in the last war when Voldemort took control of them, Dumbledore would play the savior again and remind Wizarding Britain why he held every position of supreme authority in Hogwarts, in the Wizengamot, and in the Iqua. Hogwarts. Several weeks later, Quidditch pitch on game day. Ron Weasley was looking at his 3 traitor siblings, his face a mask of uncomprehending rage. How can you be wearing their colors? Ron shouted. We are Gryffindors. Ginny Weasley rolled her eyes. Gryffindor is not playing, it is Slytherin versus Hufflepuff. Clearly cheering for Gryffindor would be a bit daft, wouldn't it? Ron stomped his feet like a 5-year-old finding coal, not candy, in his stocking. No sister of mine is wearing that in public, Ron shouted. Ginny looked down at her Cuddle Badger Quidditch jersey, which had Neville Longbottom's number on the back, the golden Hufflepuff colors, and a black and white badger hugging a heart. Katie Bell and Alicia Spinnet, 2 of the Gryffindor Chaser girls, were about to move past the Weasley blockade when they spotted Ginny in her Cuddle Badger jersey. Sister, they shouted, linking arms with the little redhead and dragging her off. The 2 chasers also sported Cuddle Badger jerseys and went off to a section usually reserved for Gryffindor fans that was filled largely with Ravenclaw and Gryffindor girls, all wearing Cuddle Badger jerseys, Hufflepuff scarves, or bearing Badger flags. Ron turned to Fred and George, who were wearing Slytherin Quidditch jerseys with crossed beater bat and whip on the front, with a crown above. And you are cheering for the bloody snakes. We hate Slytherin. Ron howled like a monkey at the zoo, discovering his banana was plastic. She's the queen, began Fred of beaters. Finished George. Fought 2 rogue bludgers, crooned Fred. For almost 15 minutes, cheered George through traffic. Added Fred, and then batted, cheered George the snitch, shouted Fred for the win. They cheered together, then high-fived, linked arms, and marched past Ron to shoulder their way to good spots in the Slytherin section with all the subtlety of Gryffindor beaters. Ron sat there blinking. Mental, my brothers are all mental. Luna Lovegood walked up, a big green toque with a large knitted silver dragon enchanted to wave its wings and snap its jaws walked up, clad in Ravenclaw robes with a Slytherin scarf. Cheering is very important today. Cheering is the most important part of Quidditch, especially today. Luna Lovegood said, grabbing Ron's arms and dragging him against his will to the Ravenclaw section, where Ron notices her hat snapping at those who tried to sneer at her made their passage easier than her travels through Ravenclaw spaces usually were. Before Luna sat down, she waved over at the Hufflepuff section, where Hermione was lit with odd blue flames that served to keep her and Noodle warm, yet somehow not light their seats on fire. Ron shook his head. Even the Hufflepuffs had snakes. Honestly, people needed to remember that Gryffindor led the light, Slytherin the dark, and everybody had to pick a side. There was no middle ground, there were no other options. Dumbledore was right, you couldn't be a little bit dark. There was pure light, and dirty, filthy, slimy snake suckers, nothing else. He didn't know why people tried to make things complicated. Simple was best. Dumbledore was right, and everyone else was wrong, just like Mum always said. Was before Forbidden Forest, Aura detail, you swear these are the only copies. Aura Holt snarled. Lucius Malfoy sneered. Honestly, Holt, I think you overestimate the market for pictures of a man and a satyr getting friendly over a log. You're going to drink this little potion, come down suddenly ill and report to St. Mungo's. You will have an amazing alibi, and it isn't your fault at all if someone else shows up to your shift. Aura Holt shuddered. What are you going to do with those Dementors? I mean, you can't think to attack the school. The Hogwarts wards would eat the Dementors alive. They are from before the Azkaban Treaty, and don't care the Ministry supposedly controls them now. Lucius Malfoy raised his new wand up and took a magical oath. I swear upon my magic, I will not turn the Dementors I use tonight upon the school of Hogwarts, nor any staff or student within its halls. His wand flashed, and Lucius then spoke softly. And his wand lit, proving he had not sworn falsely and lost his magic. Aura Holt nodded. All right then, I couldn't take an inquiry if a student got hurt because of me. Lucius smiled cruelly, exchanging photos for the Aura's Dementor amulet. My dear Holt, I did see the pictures. I am sure you could take a great deal more than most. The Aura blushed and bolted, too insulted and ashamed to really think about the oath Lucius just took. Honestly, what was Hogwarts teaching these days? He supposed it came from Binns being a ghost. No one studied magical history with any degree of critical thinking. Magical oaths and their limits was a huge portion of any true study of magical history. The first treaty with the Sidhe that sundered the fairy realm from Earth had been the first. The wizarding world had lost so much power from that one act that their loss of control to the Muggles had been all but guaranteed before the ink was even dry on their victory over the ancient elves. Sure, those poor elves left on this side, when the rest of their race were trapped forever in Fairy, had the choice to become slaves to wizards or starve, cut off from the she-magic of Fairy. But the wizard magic was so weak they actually were at the mercy of their Muggle cousins, who were free to breed like rabbits and expand into the territory the ancient race no longer defended. The devil was in the details. Magic was as much about grammar as intent. Lucius Malfoy had no ill intent against Hogwarts Castle itself. The Quidditch pitch was far outside the inner wards after all. His targets were not going to be in Hogwarts. The oath cost him exactly nothing. Joining the Aura detail under a glamour of Holt, he used the amulet to take control of his 6 Dementors from the first Aura. Getting paired with his partner, he began his circuit of patrol in the dark forest. As he fell slightly behind his partner, he snapped his wand into his hand and whispered, Imperio. The first of the patrolling auras was now under his control. When they passed the next team, he and his partner both whirled as they passed and cast Imperio on the next pair. It took 3 of the 4 hours of his shift to compromise 20 auras of the guard force that gave him 120 Dementors, the full Hogwarts patrol force. As the cheers rang from the Quidditch stadium and the echo of the play-by-play reached the Forbidden Forest, as if on cue, all the auras gave the command and set the Dementors on the Quidditch players and spectators. Lucius turned and walked towards the pitch. He would not be able to approach the outer wards without detection, but he could use his far-seeing charms to see and hear the slaughter. He was Lucius Malfoy. He did not need his lord's ring, his fortune, or his dark lord to bring his enemies down. He would never have to grovel at Voldemort's feet and beg for table scraps. This was not the blood war. Lucius had succeeded in bringing wizarding Britain to heel with corruption and guile. He didn't need brute magical power or forbidden knowledge. Blackmail was more potent than secret magics. His enemies would die screaming today, and it was Lucius Malfoy whose name would be whispered in fear by even the followers of the Dark Lord. Adrian Pusey and the Slytherin Chasers were better than the Hufflepuffs, and that should have been enough. The war in the air, however, was a storm of iron and oak that sounded more like the crashing broadsides of the Spanish Armada's failed invasion attempt than a standard Quidditch match. Harry and Neville were a storm, driving the bludgers at the Slytherin Chasers like the wrath of an angry guard. Pusey and his well-oiled chasing machine were forced to devote more of their attention to staying alive than chasing the quaffle. The Night Hag of Slytherin cackled madly as she dove between the Slytherin Chasers, and incoming carnage, Millicent Blustrode's bat hammered like a thunderbolt, slamming the bludger at a Hufflepuff chaser diving on Pusey's dropped quaffle, forcing them two to break off. Marcus Flint had been forced to dive from a shattered broom as Neville and Harry sent converging bludgers at him at the 10th minute of play, and it had been 2-on-1 in the sky since then with no quarter asked or given. The mad laughter of Millicent and her streaming black hair had the Slytherins screaming, "Night Hag! Night Hag!" even as Fred and George unfurled a banner labeled Queen of Beaters. The Hufflepuff chasers were slowly building a lead, but Draco Malfoy was showing either blind faith in Bulstrode to protect him or an almost Gryffindor courage to dive past the bludgers after the snitch. Cedric Diggory held himself among the best of the Seekers in the game, but twice he shied away from bludgers that Longbottom or Potter stopped, while Draco never wavered, trusting the lone Bulstrode somehow to protect him. If Draco succeeded in getting to the snitch first, Slytherin won. If he took too much time, the Hufflepuffs would ride bludger control to victory as their chasers did what Hufflepuffs did best and ground their way to slow and steady victory. Harry and Neville were living the Hufflepuff dream, working together, guarding their friends and working hard to a joint victory. For Draco and Millicent, this was a Slytherin moment. Their team was helpless, and only their own superiority made even a miracle possible. If they snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, it would cement their personal standing and power both within their house and before the school. If snakes could sing, they would be. Lee Jordan had passed out and been replaced by Professor McGonagall, who could actually remember to breathe. The play-by-play was so fast that the clipped tones and ever-thickening brogue of the Quidditch mad McGonagall matched well the screaming excitement of a crowd whipped into a frenzy as the pace of the match moved to that of a top-level professional match, far beyond what was expected or safe for a school match. This, of course, was when the Dementors descended. 120 demons of darkness and fear, the essence of anti-life, the spiritual parasites of the unreal, descended on a stadium filled with students whipped into a frenzy of excitement and joy. The Dementors' control was already weak through their controllers being both distant and under the imperious curse. In the face of hundreds of innocent children whipped into an emotional frenzy, they lost all control and went into a feeding frenzy as they descended upon the pitch from all sides. Albus Dumbledore called upon his patroness, and a blazing phoenix took to the sky, and a dozen Dementors fled before it. He shone, his mantle of champion of light drew around him where he stood in the stand. No one noticed or cared. In the sky, the true battle was being fought. Harry Potter touched his wand to his throat and cast his most powerful sonorous. "Get out of my sky, you unnatural filth," he roared. "Expecto Patronum." Harry hissed, and a basilisk shone in the sky above the Hogwarts Quidditch field, but only for a moment. Draco Malfoy pointed his wand at Potter and hissed. Expecto Patronum. Seeing what he had done, Neville and Millicent pointed their wands at Potter and hissed, Expecto Patronum Dalla. Luna Lovegood stood in the Ravenclaw stands and hissed, Expecto Patronum, causing Ron Weasley to scream in fear at the hated serpent tongue. Hermione Granger and Noodle together hissed from the Hufflepuff stands, Expecto Patronum Dalla. Fred and George Weasley from the heart of the Slytherin stands, Expect Patronum. As the silver fire leapt from each of their wands, it took the form of a twisting serpent of light that slammed into Harry Potter, who blazed like a star. The basilisk Patronus sprouted the wings of an eagle, the fangs of a lion, and the claws of a badger. A dragon formed of the magic of all four Hogwarts founders blazed in the sky above her students, and while its eyes blazed with the killing power of the basilisk, its great jaws opened to the roar and fire of the dragon, the ancient and most potent symbol of the power of magic herself. A dragon roughly the size of an airbus opened its mouth, and the primordial fires of creation, the flames that shattered the first and endless night, carved through the gathering darkness of 100 Dementors, and they fell from the sky screaming and burning. The power of a patroness is an aura of hope and joy, of safety and comfort that extends for somewhere between dozens of centimeters or meters from the patroness, depending on the power of its caster. The dragon of Hogwarts blazed so brightly, and its roar shook the earth so powerfully that the ley lines that converged on Hogwarts answered back, and the sky burned with an aurora more powerful than the northern lights, an aura that sang with raw defiance, and joy a maddening frenzy of ecstasy that went beyond reason or limit, a fire of life, and its passions that was the madness of the Maenad, the power of the storm, the wrath of the volcano, the song of the Vila, and the endless renewing dance of life itself. The dozen Dementors that fled fastest, and the dozen Dumblefore's own forgotten patroness had driven off, were the only ones that lived. They flew all the way back to the walls of Azkaban and refused to leave. Below in the stadium, the students sang and danced wildly in the song of power that rose between the ancient ley lines of the land, the powerful wards of Hogwarts, and the blazing dragon of light that soared in the skies above and screamed its joy to the world. Alone in the stadium, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore slammed his shields down and blocked the wild magic, the primal magic of the ancient days from him. He felt the land around him waken from its slumber. Ancient powers whose name and nature were best forgot heard the call of these ignorant children and gave answer. The land woke, the earth stirred, and power flowed into his wards, power that had not moved since the days of the founders, power that would deny entry to creatures of the dark. Dementors would not again dare the skies above these fields, no matter what the minister ordered, and no matter what the headmaster himself chose. This was not a power the children wielded. They were none of them, neither individually nor collectively as powerful as he was. They called to magic in ways that the wizards and witches learned long ago when they guided their tribes, before the rise of kings and nations, and before the separation of wizard and muggle, and magic answered. This was not the magic of spell and wand, careful and controlled. This was wild magic, changing the world as magic willed when witches and wizards cried out the needs of their folk to the powers that shaped the world and asked it do as magic chose to aid their folk. Merlin reshaped the world with the wand. Magic was bent to the will of the wizard, not the pathetic mewlings of magicless mortals. Wizards commanded, and magic obeyed. It had no more right to a will than a shovel or a hammer. It was a tool, not a god, or too often for the ancient peoples, a goddess. The old world was dead. The wild magics, the dark magics, they could not be afforded in the new world of materialism and rationality. The unreal had no place, wild magic had no place. For the greater good, the rule of wand and will must be absolute. If Voldemort was left unchecked, there would not be enough wizard blood left to carry the magical world forward even a dozen generations. But if the wild magic, not the light magic, was what wizarding Britain turned to, 2,000 years of progress would be lost. The light was the only path, the light of reason, the harsh light that permitted neither shadow nor darkness, in which even color was stripped away. Only the light, the will, the wand. 2,000 years light, wizards had striven to guide humanity away from the madness and chaos of the wild, from the seduction of the dark. Only in the harsh rule of order, of rationality, and the pure submission to the light could magic be bent to human will and made properly its servant. His precious Dementors shattered before the children of the whole of magical Britain. Maybe now Cornelius Fudge would see that he needed to take control of these children. Harry Potter was a weapon promised to his hand for the light. He must be used to strike down Voldemort before he grew powerful enough to choose for himself. Above all else, Harry Potter must be forced to fit the Child of Prophesy, for the Child of Prophesy would die bringing down Voldemort under the guidance of Albus Dumbledore, the champion of light. Only he could be trusted to guide these children who thought themselves lords and ministers of wizarding Britain. Didn't they understand? It was only Dumbledore who could see what must be done. With Grindelwald lost, only he remained to fight for the greater good. Forbidden Forest Lucius Malfoy wept. He was nothing, not lord of anything, no wealth or position to stand on. He had looked upon the face of true power, and his own worthlessness ground into him. He had no choice now. He never had. Like McNair said, Lucius had no choice but to crawl back to his Dark Lord, accept his punishment, and kiss his feet until his service had proven worthwhile enough for the Dark Lord to again grant him place and power. The truth burned him. Now he must go to Albania and seek out a bodiless wraith filled with rage beyond the limits of human reason and beg to be its tool once again. Ministry of Magic Cornelius Fudge had stormed out of Amelia Bones' office. He wished he could fire her, but a no-confidence vote would see him on the street before she could pack up her office. Probably end up with his if he tried. His own auras, the very guards of Azkaban he had ordered to Hogwarts to wield the Dementors, as the Ministry's hunting hounds were singing the praise of the Hogwarts dragon. His own guards could not wait to tell every reporter they could find that the Ministry had lost control of the Dementors, and only the wild magic of the miracle of Hogwarts had saved all of their children. Each of them swore they felt the power of the wild magic clean the taint of the Dementors off their soul, claimed none of the guards of Azkaban could remain clean, that the Dementors themselves were far more numerous than the Ministry admitted, that they were breeding off the prisoners the Ministry fed them. Those who had stood in the light of that dragon had been freed from their oaths of secrecy, sworn in Azkaban, the very secrets the treaty was meant to protect now spoken in the open without fear. He had been a fool to laugh at Dumbledore. Harry Potter and his friends were a clear and present threat to the Ministry. They needed to be brought out of Hogwarts and bound to the powers and laws of the Wizengamot. Let them be granted their Order of Merlin and their seat in the Wizengamot. One seat was worth the cost, to get them bound to the oaths of loyalty to the Wizengamot itself. After all, when the sacred 28 families each held upwards of 30 votes, who cared if these children got one? They would be bound to the laws of the Wizengamot, no longer protected by the Hogwarts Charter. Then let them see where true power lay, not in the wand, but in the regulation and law. Hundreds of dewy-eyed crusaders had come into the Wizengamot demanding change, and before long their hands and souls were as dirty as anyone else's from the deals and bargains required to get anything done. Yes, time to call a special meeting of the Wizengamot. Let the press believe it was to honor the saviors of Hogwarts. Those that mattered understood it was about bringing dangerous and chaotic elements into the arena where ancient privilege mattered more than magical prowess or fuzzy nonsense like right or wrong.